People say, what's the roughest match you ever saw? That's the one. That's the man.
If I could describe that match in one word.
Had lost a lot of his motor skills. He was very slow to react.
It was unbelievable.
One of
He
the
had to
most
relearn a
brutal
lot of things.
wrestling matches ever took place far from the big leagues.
This wasn't on national television. This was in Philadelphia in the arena.
It happened on the independent wrestling circuit in the early 2000s.
They were two guys at the tops of their own mountains.
Samoa Joe was carrying the flag of pro wrestling.
Undeniably a world champion level talent.
I'm Samoa fucking Joe. I know how to whip somebody's ass.
And then you had Necro Butcher, man, who was king of the death matches.
Necro Butcher was the wild-eyed monster of deathmatch wrestling.
When he just punched the guy in the face, the fans heard the punch connect.
Necro would just plain kick your head in. He was also in this movie called The Wrestler.
There's a fine line between madness and genius, and that was Necro.
The mainstream wrestlers, they thought I was beneath them. So when I got Samoa Joe to fight me, I wanted to show the world what I could do.
For Necro Butcher, it was an opportunity for redemption.
This match had an air of danger.
This is not fake. They just beat the shit out of each other.
The energy was like, somebody's gonna die tonight.
Decades later, those who were there reflect on the legacy
Oh my God.
of one of the most violent matches of all time.
This is a fight, but it got pretty crazy. Forearms, suplexes, punches, chairs thrown, power bombs. Holy shit! This is fucking nuts.
That was the breakthrough moment for deathmatch wrestling. Whatever he was going to do to me would not stop me. The world's a dark place sometimes. The world can be really mean. I've had so many horrible things happen to me when I was young, and wrestling became my escape. It was a false reality, a place where no one can hurt me. That's why I get into wrestling. Maybe I could be somebody else's escape. But I wanted to make it more believable. I take incredible amounts of punishment. Because the more believable that is, the more they're going to get into it. And forget about what's bothering them. My name is Dylan Summers, but you probably know me better as the Necro Butcher. I got into deathmatch wrestling because I wanted to test myself, and I saw the guys in the main event doing death matches, and I said, all right, I want to be in the main event, so that's what I have to do.
A death match is death-defying wrestling. My name is Dave Prazak, and I was one of the commentators for Necro Butcher versus Samoa Joe. Necro Butcher developed a reputation as one of the very best at the deathmatch style of wrestling. He was very reminiscent of someone like a Bruiser Brody with the crazy hair, a wild demeanor. You never knew what he was going to do next.
I've seen that guy do things to his body that I couldn't ask a man to do. Glass, thumbtacks, mouse traps, fluorescent light tubes, anything that might cut you.
My dad, to calm him down,
he volunteered
which I think did the opposite.
Always be
Up and drive 8 hours to the next show.
I don't know exactly when the evolution happened from smoking marijuana and drinking booze.
I want people to believe they're watching a physical confrontation. That psychology comes from a very real place.
As a child growing up in rural West Virginia, Dylan Summers excelled in school, setting him apart from those around him.
West Virginia isn't exactly known for academic excellence, so I'd face the wrath of my
I was a photographer at ringside.
Like a daily thing, If I had a bad day at school, I was gonna
And
watch
then
wrestling
out
with my
comes
dad on the
Terry and
weekends.
Michael. These silver robes flowing match the beat of Freebird.
trio.
And I woke up one morning. You got the freebird! And there was a fire. Or my father was burned up, so you didn't even get to see him at the funeral. You had to close casket. I just really dove deeply into wrestling because it's something I did with him. After that, I was by myself all the time. Well, it was super tough. Through my entire school years, bullying is not the word. Like, it was way worse. I mean, punched, kicked, knocked you downstairs. I couldn't tell you how many times my head was in toilets in high school. You know, and I just learned to flick that switch. You know, I just act like I was fine, and I just didn't want them to let them know they were hurting me. And that's why sometimes I can take incredible amounts of punishment. When I flick that switch, you can't hurt me. You can't hurt me. No matter what you do, you can't hurt me. And once I showed them what I could do, I was in the main events to stay.
Necro Butcher, man. My dude was carrying the flag for deathmatch wrestling. I'm Eddie Kingston, pro wrestler, and I was there when Necro and Joe decided to go at it. In the early 2000s, there was one company, folks, WWE.
Here's how we're kicking it off.
That's on TV. But you got guys over here killing themselves, doing independent wrestling. We wanted to show we're different from WWE, doing it our way.
Dissatisfied with mainstream wrestling on TV, hardcore fans flocked to the independents, where performers pushed the limits.
Almost every company, there was some type of death match in it. That is not right. But some people considered it garbage wrestling. Then Ring of Honor came out, you know, hold for hold, hard hitting, all that stuff. Ring of Honor set a standard for independent wrestling with guys like Homicide, Low Key, Bryan Danielson, Christopher Daniels, CM Punk. And then you had Samoa Joe, who was carrying the flag of pro wrestling.
Although Samoa Joe is a top star today, in 2005, he was still making his name on the indie scene.
There was never a doubt in my mind that I was one of the best wrestlers in the world. Once that curtain brushes past my face and we're out there in front of the crowd, the switch is turned and we're ready to go. My name is Nu'ufalau Joel Sianoa, and I'm one half of the war that was Joe versus Necro. My whole life has pretty much been on stage with my family's Polynesian show. Probably did 2 or 3 world tours before I ever stepped foot in a wrestling ring. You know, it definitely prepared me for this career. In entertainment, you need your hook. And at my core, my style is walk you down, smash you in the face. Ring of Honor at the time, I had become champion. We've had a 2-year run with the heavyweight championship, and the rest is history.
At the time, I was a consistent main eventer doing death matches. And I said, all right, now what? And I wanted to test myself against the best in the business. But what had gotten to me was that
he was able to be maneuvered with between. And he did.
Ring of Honor wrestlers
his face grimaced a little bit whenever I sprayed him with cold water.
So
I was like, you know, we might have someone off the airplane in a wheelchair.
I always saw a lot of deathmatch wrestlers. They always felt
he couldn't
like
really.
They were kind of looked down upon. The truth of it is, you know, guys in ROH, we had our style. You know, we had what we were proud of, what we were doing. It's a very different world. I mean, me personally, I'm down to wrestle whoever. That's never been an issue for me. But as far as like wrestling like Necro Butcher, you know, it was never brought up to me or ever brought up, ever. I think the fans probably have more to do with this than anything else.
Before social media, we had message boards where super hardcore, nerdy fans like me would go and they would just talk to each other and talk about matches they've seen. If you went to the Ring of Honor board, it was a little bit like noses up in the air, like all of the wrestling was beneath it. My name is Rob Naylor, and I worked at places like CZW and NXT and FCW, and I, at the time, went on the Ring of Honor message board, and I was like, I want to see Samoa Joe wrestle Necro. And then, oh my God, the barrage of angry other wrestling fans. You're an idiot, he sucks. They just didn't want Big Bad Necro Butcher to sully their wonderful organization. But then, there was an incident at Chikara.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Chikara.
Stepping out of the hardcore scene, Necro Butcher and Madman Pondo enter a family-friendly tag team tournament, putting Necro on a collision course with Samoa Joe.
Chikara was bring the grandma, bring the kids. You're gonna have a fun time watching the wrestling. In this lovely little cafeteria.
It might have been a bit weird on paper, but I could not say no because that was my only source of income. I didn't care who these guys were, I was just gonna beat their ass. It just so happened that 2 of them were Ring of Honor students.
Since Ring of Honor didn't want to send someone they were gonna beat, they just sent a couple of their students.
I was nervous because I didn't really know who Necro Butcher was, and he's like, we just go out there and we'll just brawl. I didn't really learn that in school.
Tonight it's gonna be nothing but curtains for you two.
We were definitely a little nervous, but we figured, hey, we got this.
Yeah, yeah.
This. Boy, howdy, were we wrong, buddy.
Not even waiting for the ring introductions to be complete.
We had to try to make a believable match with someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So when they start stinking the place up, I'm just gonna beat their ass. I do what I do because this is my job and I need the money. What package are you offering to promoters? You have to offer something different. I think I'm pretty darn different.
Some people were very concerned and believed that Pondo and Necro took advantage of the students.
The Ring of Honor board, forget about it. They were really mad at Necro Butcher. It was only another reason for them not to like him. Because they're just like, how dare he, you know, that's breaking the code. Oh, he's unsafe. He's reckless.
Chikara, you don't really do that stuff.
Who cares? I think people found it entertaining. That's what I do. I beat people up in an entertaining manner.
He was knocked out from the clothesline. I got knocked out twice in the match. His chest looks like hamburger meat. I have no idea where I'm at. It was just survival.
Yeah, it was a little rough.
Yeah.
Turns out I got the last laugh. That's why I got Samoa Joe to fight me, you know?
After the match, message boards had their little rumor mills going. The rumor was that Joe was not happy.
Because Joe was one of their mentors coming out of Ring of Honor, and I think he may have felt ROH was disrespected by these guys, and it perfectly set the stage for Joe to face Necro to get some revenge.
The fans bought into it, and they're like, all right, he's gonna get dealt some justice via Samoa Joe.
And my dad to calm him down,
Discussion on the internet
which I think did the opposite. Up and drive 8 hours to the next show.
Owner, promoter.
I don't know exactly when the evolution happened from smoking marijuana, drinking booze,
There's no television program to try to really build a story. You have to use the internet. And Ian Rotten was gearing up for his first event in Philadelphia at the old ECW arena, and he needed a big match to fill the seats.
The match that had long seemed impossible suddenly became inevitable. After the Chikara incident, Necro Butcher and Samoa Joe signed with Ian Rotten, and the match is set.
When you're going from
overdose.
First time
he dropped on me and just dropped him and I didn't CPR. Ambulance took him. He was in the hospital. I didn't remember what happened.
I'm gonna have
when they brought me in.
My life.
Set to return to Japan, Terry boards a
show the world a deathmatch wrestler could compete with the biggest, baddest in the world. Which is all I wanted all along.
With Necro Butcher versus Samoa Joe set, Joe takes to the mic to go after his opponent.
There's some people here who are bullies and there are some who are fighters. These are ROH students. They were taken advantage of by a bully.
I don't agree with being called a bully.
Feel that reveled commitment to their rock and roll lifestyle.
Once the jack started flowing, the birds were ready to party with it.
Until a flight on a routine trip to Japan.
Even though he came back, he didn't come back.
That affected Necro.
Monday night in Memphis at the Mid-South Coliseum.
I thought to myself, wow, so he thinks I'm not good enough to be in there with him. Okay, fine, I got this. And now's my chance to make a statement.
The Necro Butcher is fucking dead!
Making reference to Necro Butcher.
So, you know, dude, can I be honest? Dude, legitimately, I look back and I literally knew nothing about all these moving pieces that were a part of it. Like, yeah, I never trained a kid at ROH school a day in my life. Like, I've never watched the match. It was mentioned to me for a promo about, oh yeah, he roughed up a couple of kids at the ROH school, so you're like gonna get revenge. Are you cool with it? I was like, yeah, sure. It's part of the show, man. But the more I hear and the more I realize the old Ian Rotten may have been telling people a lot of different tales, trying to get certain reactions out of them.
Well, I mean, there was gossip. You weren't talented. You were doing something that was beneath him. I don't know if it was true or not. I said a lot of people are going to watch this. So I just knew I had to show them what I could do so they could not deny me any longer.
For me personally, my wife, then girlfriend at the time, she lived close to Philly. So like I literally took the booking because I was trying to get some ass. We were definitely different mindsets walking into this match. Until I got to the arena, then I realized it was something different.
On June 11th, 2005, hundreds packed the ECW arena expecting a bloodbath.
This is IWA Mid-South Wrestling.
As I get to the building, you know, the boys are standing outside. And I'm just like, yo, what's up, fellas? And they go, yo, what's up, man? I've been waiting for this. And I'm like, all right, you know, cool, homie. You know, what the fuck is going on here, man? Like,
I had just come back from Japan, having flown all night, drinking. I'm gonna sober up, I'm gonna get in my 72 Ford pickup and drive to Philadelphia and fight Samoa Joe. I had arrived within an hour of showtime, went down to my little secluded spot, and just waited my turn.
Typically in a pro wrestling match, a referee will check in with opponents. What is the plan finish? Is there anything I need to know about? There was none of that on this day. My name is Bryce Remsburg, and I was the referee for the infamous Samoa Joe Necro Butcher match. The conversation that I might have had with the two of them was definitely shorter than 30 seconds.
My mind was made up beforehand. Whatever he was going to do to me would not stop me. Not in that building, not on that night.
I know what I'm going there for. I'm gonna get cracked, he's gonna get cracked, and it's gonna be a brawl.
Everyone in the locker room had the same questions as the wrestling fans did about, do they really hate each other? Is this gonna turn into a real fight? What's gonna happen?
All that shit lent into creating an atmosphere and a vibe where I was like, somebody's gonna die tonight.
And we are ready for a long-awaited matchup.
I recall being in the ring before the match started, looking up and seeing pretty much the whole locker room lined up around the commentary table.
I did commentary with Eddie Kingston and CM Punk. We weren't doing professional commentary by any means. It was just us reacting to the spectacle that we were seeing.
I walked up with a hot dog, sat down, I said, let's do this.
It's the match everybody's been waiting to see.
By that point, everybody was foaming at the mouth to see this thing.
I went up to the balcony to watch this and was like, holy shit. The whole building was chanting.
And as I'm kind of walking around the ring here, you start to hear, fuck him up, Joe. Necro's gonna fuck you up.
Philadelphia is just very bloodthirsty. They wanted to see violence, they wanted to see blood, and they wanted to see Joe kill Necro Butcher.
There's the man right there who wears the shirt that says choose death.
There he is, look at him. All the combustible elements were there. They were just primed and ready to just kick the shit out of each other.
Face to face, they come.
We obviously know they didn't come here to see the goddamn wrestling. They came here to see a fight. Let's let everybody know that what this is really about. The easiest way to make sure everybody knows it's a no-rules brawl without announcing it is, you know, take the rules and throw them over the top rope.
They don't need a referee.
There was already like a bunch of gunpowder in the keg with no referee. It's chaos.
Now we've got everybody where we want them, and now we take them on the journey.
Here we go! Break it down in Philadelphia!
These forums where I'm telling this guy how this match is going to go.
He wanted to establish that's how hard he wanted to throw. I said, all right. You have now just set your punishment gauge. He could have done it much easier.
It's all about believability. I want them to think he's trying to kill me. If I want to have any chance of beating him, I want to fight with him on the floor. I want to brawl.
Oh, Enziguri upside the head of the Necro Butcher.
And that is a way you can suck in the crowd. I wanted him to hit me. I was going to fly over the guardrail. But he hit me so hard, I couldn't go over the guardrail. Oh, Jesus.
Oh, here comes Joe! Down goes Necro!
I'm just going to calmly walk over the guardrail now. I had to sit down and compose myself for a minute after that.
All these fans are moving. They're parting like the Red Sea.
I'm trying to beat the deathmatch wrestler with pro wrestling. I'm using my body as a weapon to try to break you up. It was meant to accentuate that contrast of styles.
But Necro's back to his feet with the headbutt.
And no, there's the headbutt. You don't headbutt a Samoan. That's like a rule you're taught.
I had a very bad cut on my head. I knew a stiff breeze would bust me open, let alone a Samoan headbutt.
Any deathmatch wrestler will tell you if they've already got something open, they can't wait for you to work it. And we got that fucker open.
Authentic headbutts, and then Necro's bleeding. So the fervor only grows from there.
Necro learned a secret from me. If you want a standing ovation, you knock their chairs out from underneath them.
Everybody in this building is on their feet.
Standing ovation.
I don't think Samoa Joe was really enjoying himself at this point in the match. I was having a grand old time myself.
I mean, it's not the best feeling, but...
Trying to get him to a place where we could safely do the power slam, or so I thought. You know, when you make people get out of their seat and move around, you run the risk of spilling drinks.
You could see it all over the floor. There was just wet spots everywhere.
So maybe a power slam wasn't the best idea.
He ran at me. I went to scoop him. I don't know if his foot slipped or whatever, but as we went for the lift, I felt him grab me real tight. He was just stuck to me and then pushed my hips through and he was going over. Yeah, it didn't quite work the way he wanted it to.
And we're wondering in the commentary position, how is that physically possible?
I've never seen such a thing.
I turn around, I go, Jesus, you good? And he's like,
I hear that sickening thud of skull on cement. That right there is a sign of danger. That's something you're not going to see on Monday Night Raw.
No, in today's wrestling world, that match shouldn't continue probably. But that match and that night, that atmosphere, that energy from the crowd, I was like, now we're in the flow. And it just got more violent, more fucked up from there.
Just 2 minutes into the match, Samoa Joe drives Necro Butcher face first onto the concrete.
At that time, we didn't stop. We go until the wheels fall off.
Maybe a normal person would have been hurt, but I was fine.
Oh, that boot definitely did not tickle.
Oh, Joe's wiping the blood off him.
Oh, that's a great touch. Wiping the blood off his head and wiping on his chest. The fans are such an integral part to all this. They're so into it.
If you look at that floor right now, you're gaining a number of bodily fluids. So when things got to the outside, this was Necro's environment. But anytime we were inside the ring, that was my domain.
Over the rail and back they go.
Body language is I don't think much of you. Arrogant pin, elbow on the chin, not really scooping the leg. But in the face of that, here he is, fighting back.
Necro kicks out.
He is not giving up. He is continuing to fight. He puts the arm up. And then the very pro-Joe crowd, you start hearing more Necro, Necro, Necro chants. And it's because of Necro selling. The fans get louder and louder. And now you have that dynamic, the fans fighting with each other. They're turning.
Wait till you hear all these fans right here in a chorus.
I understood what role I played in this. This is somebody fighting against all the odds, fighting to break out of his box in the face of this insurmountable entity.
Off the ropes comes Necro. Connects with the boot.
Joe's weapon is his killer instinct and his ability. Those are just tools. For me, the opponent, the guardrail, the ring itself, those are the tools of my trade. You don't really have time to be hurt because you got to think, okay, what am I doing next? What am I doing next? Oh, I was trying to find a piece of guardrail I could rip off. I'm going to smash you with the guardrail.
Was that discussed beforehand?
No. He was a good sport about it.
Yeah, it sucks. It's not pleasant, it's not pleasant. What people don't realize is that Necro is blind also, very blind.
I have my glasses here, I can't tell who's who. There's a red light there, red light over there, but I can't see nothing.
He did that and I was like, Jesus, I did not expect it.
This guy just swings for the general fuzzy mound that's in front of him and he hopes that it connects.
I hit him with the perfect punch. Like I felt all of my knuckles hit him right in the jaw. And I thought, I'm gonna do it again.
That's the worst thing you do for me. Now the switch turns an extra couple degrees and I have come to destroy worlds, and this is the world before me, which I must lay waste to.
Before I could do it a third time, I went flying through the air.
Did you see the slap fight? Holy shit!
Good God. It's just.
Look at that blood everywhere, man. This was wild.
That was the one where I was like, holy shit. That one made me stand up in my chair, and I was thinking about going down there.
What the fuck? What is that?
Is it possible that you got a concussion right then and there?
But not me, not the kid. A normal man, perhaps.
I think people would find that hard to believe.
That's not gonna hurt me. I know what I'm doing.
You know, everybody talks about his face hitting the floor. What they don't talk about is his shoulder coming down on top of my face and the back of my head being driven into the cement. Thought my nose was broken, thought I'd shattered my orbital. I broke my nose a billion times, so it wasn't uncommon. But yeah, this one put another fracture in my nose. I give him this, at least he looks worse for wear for the whole deal.
There's an old Johnny Valentine quote. He said, I can't make you believe in wrestling, but I can make you believe in Johnny Valentine. No one is ever gonna watch that match. Say, yeah, that's all fake. I'm tough enough that I can take that shit. Let's exploit what we have.
In the heart of the legendary ECW arena, Samoa Joe and Necro Butcher leave everything in the ring and on the floor.
Now see, this is what you call long-term storytelling, guys. Remember they had that Chikara match? I suplexed the kid off the apron, and then a month or two later, the master suplexes me off the apron. Long-term storytelling at its finest.
You know what sucks? I wish I could have said I planned all this shit, but happy accident.
Yeah, happy accidents, here we go.
The way Necro is moving and selling, he's definitely hurt and he's banged up, but he's with it.
Just to see Necro get up, we were like, he's like rising from the dead.
I'm not a guy that will ever dictate to somebody what dangerous things they should do to their own body. I put the ball in his court. I said, you know, you tell me how far you want this to go. But he had a vision. It's a more primal vision. It's definitely not eloquent in its execution.
I think here I was telling him, put the guardrail up on the turnbuckle. There's so many times in this match where I just said some shit that could easily be misinterpreted. But every time I told him to do something, he did exactly what I wanted him to do.
In those circumstances, I will default to the masochist and let him paint his picture.
His ability to dish out punishment and my ability to absorb punishment is what I based the match upon.
Power lap coming up! Somebody's gonna die!
In some form or fashion, they were reading the same book. I'm not sure they're in the same chapter, same page quite, but to be done even remotely safely involves a breed of cooperation.
The way Necro's looking at it right here is, the more he gets beat up and still stands up, he's becoming a bigger star. Back in the day, before that match, me and Necro, we was in a light tube match. We were just bloody as hell. I suplexed Necro, and one of them went in so deep in his arm, it just cut a whole chunk out of there. I start yelling out, "Fucking ambulance! Ambulance!" And I'm just feeling terrible that this happened to Necro. And finally, Necro looked over to me and he said, "Pondo, would you chill out and cheer up?" You know, he just never complained about it. This was his chance to get his name out there and show the world exactly what the Necro Butcher can do. And he just kept on going, and here he is today.
It's a very old school way of getting somebody over. It works. People can register that. People can respect an underdog.
Is he going to get back to his feet? The drama continues to build. It's great storytelling.
Joe with the cover.
It has to be one-sided for this story I'm trying to tell. Too many matches today, they're too back and forth. The fans don't buy the comeback because the guys don't take the time to set the heat the way they need to.
The whole point was, in my head, was like, we're gonna put this guy through this carnivore of torture that he's wanted so badly for so long. We're gonna give him everything he asked for.
That could have been a paralyzation there. Had somebody been an inch this way or an inch that way, that could have easily been a paralyzation there as well.
Cover! He kicked out!
The look on Joe's face is like, what do I gotta do to put this guy away?
They're chanting Necro. He's earning the respect of the crowd.
The fans of Philadelphia going nuts, baby.
All the punishment Necro Butcher takes, he's gonna make it matter. He's not just gonna blow off any kind of damage.
And they're showing their support for Joe as well. Chop across the chest of Necro.
I wanted to look really feeble and barely on my feet. That's what I was trying to do here. A man doesn't win when he's relaxed and thinks he's in control. A man wins when he thinks he's losing.
There it is. He's fighting back. Boom, boom. Oh my God.
In the moment, I'm annoyed at that. Like, what the fuck, man?
Samoa Joe with the palm strikes.
Classic pro wrestling technique, the open hand palm strikes. Bro, put your hands up. That's the first rule.
With each slap, you can see a mist of blood coming off the face of Necro Butcher.
If I had to pinpoint a time when my girlfriend at the time had left the match, it was where the blood was visibly flying into the crowd. She said she almost threw up, and then she decided to bounce. And that's the whole point of what I was doing. When you're dog walking somebody, it's not a pretty affair. And that's what that whole sequence was about. I've had enough. I'm done with this. It's time for you to die now.
The match between Necro Butcher and Samoa Joe barrels toward its violent finish.
Look at the blood on the body of Samoa Joe from Necro.
This was not any ordinary wrestling match, so it wasn't gonna end any ordinary way. Joe's here because he wants to be here. Necro has nothing to lose. So the story of Necro, call me spots that lead to his demise.
Stay down!
He's saying that I'm gonna lose, but I'm gonna go down swinging.
The lasting image of that match is the final strike. And Samoa Joe effectively wins the match by knocking Necro out.
What is unique about this finish is that it's, in essence, a technical knockout.
He didn't have to just pin him for 3 seconds. He kept him down for 10.
He just could not take any more beating.
No. And that's it. Samoa Joe gets the knockout. Knockout win for Samoa Joe.
Your great messiah of hardcore death has been stricken down. All justice has been served.
What a mess.
Though the match may be over, Joe gives Necro one last parting shot.
Oh, he's not done.
Brother was down there selling so long, so whatever there, I gave him like the little kick in the head, just like I knew he would. He popped right up and started swinging over the fences. And the monster rises again from the dead.
Really? Really? Get out of here.
The hardcore Jesus is pissed.
I'm like, well, I can't leave you laying in a puddle. I mean, like, I thought it was important to leave the arena with him at least standing.
What a war between these two men.
If there's no fight in somebody, then there's nothing really there to care about. So it was imperative to me that we left Necro with the right kind of perception on him of being just one of the toughest motherfuckers on planet Earth.
Match of the year, huh? Oh, wow.
Everyone in the building knew that they had just witnessed something great. And when the fans finally got a chance to see it on video, it just intensified the buzz about the match on the internet.
How ironic that that event was called Something to Prove, because that's exactly what I was trying to do. And I think that's exactly what I did. That night in Philly was special. I knew I'm never going to make it to Madison Square Garden. That was my Madison Square Garden. After that match, I was a made man in that building. And that's all I ever wanted.
You know, coming through the curtain in the post-match, it couldn't have been more, I mean, docile. You know, like, Necro came back, dapped him up.
I went to Joe immediately and thanked him. I obviously had tremendous amount of respect for him as a wrestler. He trusted the vision of what I had and helped me follow it through. Well, after the match, I had another show to do that evening in the same arena. So I had to go back down to the catacombs and put my skull back together and catch my breath and get ready to go out there and do it all over again.
And here comes the Butcher!
You'd think maybe he'd be tired, but no, he just kept going.
Excuse me!
He never went 80%, you know, he was always 110. It's a very heavy price taking suplexes to the floor, taking these bumps, and he did it because he had pride in what he was doing and he wanted to get to the next level. It certainly seemed to me that there's almost like a before and after for both of those guys.
And eventually earned Necro a regular spot in ROH for a couple of years.
Ring of Honor could not deny me any longer. Well, I was on every show for like 4 years.
He goes on to be in the movie The Wrestler in 2008.
Talk to me about it. What do you want to do tonight? Well, are you cool with the staples?
Maybe it was a mainstream moment.
Staple gun.
But at the time, I had more wrestling to do.
We were in this together as independent wrestlers. We were all trying just to set the world on fire with our wrestling. We were misfits, all of us. Even Joe was. We saw Samoa Joe's name getting bigger and bigger over time. There was a sense of pride. If any indie guy made it, we were all proud.
I finished up with ROH, I moved on to TNA Wrestling, and then moved on to WWE. And now I currently
Flight
find
that will
myself
change
all
his
over
life
the
forever.
Terry's accumulated so many pills that I'm having to push him with it. He's dying on me.
Closed to me.
Necro Butcher never got his WWE run, probably because he was such an outlaw. His home was independent wrestling, and so it's honestly not much of a surprise that that was where he really excelled.
Many independent wrestlers have gone on to have lauded careers all around the world. If you ask me why maybe Necro wasn't a part of that pantheon of people, you know, at the end of the day, it's just hard to put on a cereal box, you know?
That's the thing about death matches, and people just don't understand. They say that we make hot dogs and handshakes. I do believe that for Necro, the crowd would chant his name, and to a wrestler, having a crowd chant your name, sing your song, that means more to us than anything. You're not gonna talk him out of what he loves. He loves wrestling.
I was going to Japan like 6 times a year. I'd go to Mexico a couple of times, Puerto Rico.
Flight that will change his life forever.
I had just come
Terry's
back from
accumulated
Japan,
so many pills
and I
that
didn't know what was going on. But
I'm having to push him with it, and he's dying on me.
I remember when I first seen him, thinking to myself,
Before a
look at the
flight
weight
to
that he
Japan.
lost. He had lost a lot of weight. Like a lot of weight. And I didn't understand. I didn't know what was going on.
He was able to be maneuvered
Shortly
in
after
between.
that, I went to visit
And
him.
he did.
Took us out to eat.
His face grimaced a little bit whenever I sprayed him with cold water. And I was like, you know, we might have someone off the airplane in a wheelchair.
I always appreciated everything you did for me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm telling him, I'm like, if you want me to stay, I'll stay. And he's like, no. So that was when I found out that Necro had cancer.
Diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, Necro Butcher fights for his life.
Turns out I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was in a hospital bed for about 9 months and had no energy whatsoever. Everything hurt. laying in bed for 9 months gives you plenty of time to reevaluate things, you know, over the years. I've beat so many guys up, it's not even something I keep track of anymore. And after a while, they just blend together. Looking back, with the Samoa Joe match, let's be honest, that's what people are going to remember about me. Quite honestly, I'm baffled sometimes. People talk about this match that weren't even alive when we did it. I'm still very flattered by it.
It is one of the greatest brawls you will ever see.
It's a time capsule, man. If people want to know how the independents were from 2000 to 2010, that was it. They made a moment. For all of us on the indies, man. Because I tell you right now, more people started booking those kind of matches. They were the spark.
Just how believable that brawl was is something that young wrestlers now draw inspiration for what a fight could be like.
It's wild that so many people have loved and enjoyed and taken pleasure from watching this. I just never would have imagined would have taken on the life that it has. It's cool that that was part of my journey. It's neat.
As he wages his battle with cancer, the Necro Butcher discovers a new outlook.
When I was in the bed, I found something that was unshakable, and that was myself. In the game of life, you're not in charge of where you start on the board. The only thing you're in control of is when you quit. It's gonna hurt, you're gonna suffer, but you have to believe in yourself. And if you can't believe you can do it, then you're suffering for nothing. We did 3 cycles of chemo with no improvement. And they said, all right, if we don't see improvement on the 4th one, we're gonna quit, and that's gonna be that. And when you know it, that 4th one took. And then got back into wrestling.
This is the guy that I have seen go through the craziest
And my dad to calm him down, which I think did the opposite.
Walk away.
Up and drive 8 hours to the next show.
I don't know exactly when the evolution happened from smoking marijuana, drinking booze, to...
I know he missed being home.
Motherfuckers Club.
You know, I'm not moving around great right now, but I'm moving around pretty good for age 52. I'm still out there on the road. I'm motivated. I just had a rough match last week. About died. I understand the way we look back at things, the further they get in the mirror.
It is June 11th, 2005. We're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
That night in Philadelphia. It was my most immediate and important event in my life. What does any artist want but for his art to be remembered fondly? And I think we're past the point of this being remembered more than fondly. So thank you, Samoa Joe. Thank you.
Feeling is mutual, the thanks is mutual. He managed to take a random afternoon that I was not expecting would be what it was. And it's become kind of a touchstone for inspiration in the great zeitgeist of wrestling. You know, to me, I think that's when pro wrestling can be at its very best.
I won him over with my ability to not quit. And that's the message I try to tell people. I haven't quit, so you better not either. I've had so many horrible things happen to me when I was young. I just wanted to belong and not be by myself. And I wanted to connect with other people that had the same passions I did. Just appreciate the fine art that is professional wrestling. And then to contribute to that fine art, well, what more could a man ask for?
If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could captivate them by pushing the boundaries of physical endurance. He simply needed to get a reaction. This drive birthed a hardcore legend, but the reality of a normal Mick Foley match was far from the standard fare. His encounters were brutal, often involving thumbtacks, barbed wire, and even explosives during his time in Japan. He was a performer willing to endure monumental pain, falling on concrete or crashing through tables, engulfed in fire, just to elicit a visceral response from the crowd. His daughter, Noelle Foley, and his longtime friend, Colette Foley, both noted his addiction to the roar of the crowd. Realism was his primary tool. By his own admission, he did not believe he had a successful night, unless he had physical trouble walking back to his hotel room. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain, but he thrived on his ability to absorb it and project it into a compelling narrative for the audience. Part 2. The birth of Mankind in the Japanese influence. Before he was Mankind, he was Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable character who commanded attention through sheer charisma and an erratic in-ring style. Jim Cornette, who worked as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, observed that Foley possessed a masterful grasp of wrestling psychology. He knew the fans craved someone who appeared completely out of control, someone who seemed to rebel against the script. By taking the audience on that unpredictable ride, Foley ensured the spotlight remained firmly on him. Foley's early education in extreme storytelling took place in Japan. Living with sparse accommodations, a mattress on the floor, and a videocassette recorder that barely functioned, he would study Japanese wrestling tapes for up to 12 hours a day. He was captivated by the realism and the concept of defeating not just the opponent, but the surrounding environment. During this era, legendary wrestler Terry Funk became a mentor to Foley. Funk was considered one of the greatest of all time for his ability to make audiences suspend their disbelief instantly. Together, they engaged in explosive, highly dangerous death matches. Foley viewed these extreme acts as proof of his dedication, a way to stand out in a crowded industry. At that time, the World Wrestling Federation was a heavily sanitized general audience product. Vince McMahon did not originally want to hire Foley, believing he lacked the conventional marketability and aesthetic appeal required for television. However, Jim Ross, acting as Vice President of Talent Relations, championed Foley. The company needed fresh, dynamic opponents for one of their biggest stars, The Undertaker, according to behind-the-scenes accounts. McMahon finally relented but demanded that Foley's face be covered with a mask. Thus, Mankind was born. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Fame producer, recalled the monumental challenge of building a character out of what McMahon initially perceived as nothing. Yet, this bizarre persona succeeded entirely because of Mick Foley's absolute commitment. He connected with the audience on a profound level, willing to try anything to make the character resonate. Part 3. The Architecture of a Nightmare. Leading up to the 1998 King of the Ring, the World Wrestling Federation producers needed a way to reignite the feud between Mankind and The Undertaker. They turned to a relatively new concept, Hell in a Cell. Traditionally, cage matches ended when competitors escaped over the top or through the door. The innovation of Hell in a Cell was adding a roof, locking both men inside with a promise that only one would walk out. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels 9 months prior was a critical milestone, hailed by many as a masterpiece of in-ring storytelling. Foley, watching that first match, realized he could not match the athletic prowess of those competitors. He knew he had to rely on a different kind of spectacle. In a conversation with Terry Funk, a hypothetical joke was made. What if the match started on top of the structure? And what if Foley was thrown off? What began as dark humor quickly took root in Foley's mind. He pitched the idea of being thrown off the cell to Mr. McMahon and The Undertaker. Initially, there was heavy reluctance. The Undertaker was not on board with tossing his opponent from such a perilous height, but Foley was persistent, eventually convincing the chairman to approve the stunt. Foley approached this match not as the beginning of a new chapter, but as a desperate measure to keep his career afloat, fully believing his time in the spotlight was coming to an end. Part 4, The Fall That Stopped Time. When the fateful night arrived, the atmosphere inside the arena was thick with anticipation. The commentators, Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, were kept completely in the dark regarding Foley's plans. As Mankind made his entrance, rather than stepping inside the structure, he began to climb the steel mesh to the roof. It was an unprecedented move that left fans, officials, and announcers utterly bewildered. Though he had assured management he was comfortable with the stunt, Foley later admitted he was terrified of heights. When The Undertaker followed him to the top, a terrifying reality set in. The roof of the cell was held together by zip ties. With nearly 600 pounds of human weight shifting across the steel, the mesh began to sag dangerously. Onlookers could hear the zip ties snapping one by one. The structure was giving way. As the two men brawled near the edge of the cell, hovering over the tiny announce tables below, the tension reached a breaking point. Then, in a moment that remains etched in the minds of millions, the Undertaker grabbed Mankind and flung him from a roof. A 300-pound man fell almost 20 feet through the air, crashing violently through the Spanish announce table. To those watching, time seemed to move in slow motion, yet it was over in the blink of an eye. The sound of the impact was horrifying. Backstage, the locker room erupted in sheer panic. Jimmy Corderas, a referee watching from the production area, described it as witnessing a horrific automobile accident. Many honestly believed they had just watched a man die on live television. Colette Foley, watching at home with their two young children, was forced to tell them it was fake just to soothe their cries, while internally she was paralyzed with fear. Foley miraculously landed flat on the desk, cushioning the blow just enough to save his life. Medical personnel, including Dr. Francois Petit, alongside Terry Funk and company officials, rushed to ringside. The emergency responders brought a gurney, preparing to transport Foley to the hospital. The match appeared to be over. Part 5, the second ascent and the limit of human endurance. But the story did not end on that gurney. In a display of unfathomable adrenaline and a twisted dedication to his craft, Foley realized that staying in the match would captivate the audience like nothing else in history. Ignoring the pleas of everyone telling him to stay down, he rolled off the stretcher and began climbing the cell once more. The crowd erupted. Backstage, the sentiment shifted from concern to sheer disbelief. How could a human body sustain such trauma and continue? Once back on top of the compromised roof, the planned storyline took a catastrophic turn. The intention was for a choke slam to slowly break the mesh, allowing Foley to be safely lowered into the ring. Instead, the cage panel completely gave way. Mankind plummeted straight through the roof, plummeting into the ring below, hitting the solid, thinly padded wooden mat with a sickening thud. To make matters worse, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the opening directly behind him, striking him squarely in the face upon landing. This second fall was entirely accidental and far more dangerous than the first. Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. Backstage, panic reached a fever pitch. Terry Funk and the medical staff flooded the ring once again. The Undertaker looked down at his motionless opponent, waiting for a sign of life. Funk confirmed that Foley was still breathing and masterfully provoked the Undertaker into attacking, him to buy the medical team precious time to evaluate Foley. According to standard protocols today, the match would have been immediately terminated. But in that era, matches were rarely stopped. Performers merely bought time. After 42 seconds of unconsciousness, Foley awoke. Through the haze of a severe head injury, his instinct as an entertainer took over. Realizing he had a massive puncture wound below his lip, he deliberately pushed his tongue to the hole to create a gruesome, unforgettable television visual. He smiled, revealing that one of his teeth had been knocked out by the chair and had miraculously lodged itself inside his nasal cavity. Despite suffering a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that would plague him for 6 weeks, and a severe concussion, Foley finished the 17-minute match. The final act saw him slammed into thousands of steel thumbtacks before The Undertaker finally secured a victory. Part 6. The Aftermath and the Burden of a Legacy. When Foley finally passed through the curtain, he was greeted by a profoundly relieved Vince McMahon. The chairman thanked him for his unparalleled sacrifice, but made him promise never to attempt anything like that again. The physical and emotional toll extended far beyond the arena. Colette Foley, waiting desperately for a phone call, was furious. Her children had believed their father was dead. The reality of his profession had violently collided with their family life. Yet, for Foley's career, the match was a catalyst. It cemented an unbreakable bond between him and the audience. transforming him from a controversial hire into a world champion within 6 months. However, the precedent had been set. The bar for extreme spectacle was raised to an almost unattainable height. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed his physical limits once again in a brutal I Quit match against The Rock. Handcuffed and defenseless, Foley absorbed 11 unprotected steel chair shots to the head. It was a sequence so vicious that it deeply traumatized his children, who were seated in the front row. Today, the medical community understands the catastrophic long-term effects of such repetitive brain trauma. The specter of chronic traumatic encephalopathy looms heavily over performers from that era. Medical professionals warned Foley years ago that continuing to wrestle would leave him crippled. As his family noted, the consequences of those concussions are a daily source of anxiety. Foley himself admits he cannot recall periods of his own life, a terrifying reality for a man who sacrificed his body for the roar of the crowd. Conclusion: coming to terms with the canvas. Mick Foley is a multiple-time world champion, a best-selling author, and a dedicated philanthropist. Yet, he is acutely aware that his name will forever be synonymous with Hell in a Cell. For years, he harbored deep resentment toward that match, feeling trapped by its overwhelming shadow. But time and a profound conversation with The Undertaker helped him embrace his history. They realized that what they created that night in 1998 would outlive them both. During a visit to the company's archival warehouse, Foley came face-to-face with the original cell structure. Touching the cold steel, the man who endured the unimaginable broke down in tears, a rare moment of vulnerability reflecting the gravity of how close he came to losing everything. Professional wrestling is a world where men and women engage in a fantasy form of combat, often leaving the arena in far worse condition than they arrived, all to earn the acceptance of total strangers. For Mick Foley, the pursuit of authenticity and the desperate need to be loved drove him to the absolute limits of human endurance. Looking back, we are left to ponder the monumental sacrifices made for our entertainment. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. It was surreal, sublime performance art painted with real blood and genuine jeopardy. Mick Foley survived Hell in a Cell, leaving behind an immortal legacy that continues to captivate, horrify, and awe the world of sports entertainment. Dark Side of the Ring, The Descent of Mankind, The Gateway to Madness. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view, one match would earn its place as one of the most shocking exhibitions in the history of professional wrestling. The Undertaker versus Mankind. The battleground was Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. For those who were in the building, and for those watching around the world, there was an expectation of violence. We knew it was going to be crazy, but nobody could have predicted the sheer magnitude of the madness that was about to unfold. We had two talents out there who liked to push the envelope until it simply fell over the edge. Professional wrestling is built on illusion, but you cannot fake gravity. In a business where men and women regularly perform the extraordinary, there are limits. I have been frightened by a lot of things in professional wrestling, but nothing frightened me as much as the events of that night. At least, nothing frightened me as much until later on in that very same match. What left fans fundamentally stunned was the unrelenting punishment Mick Foley endured until you saw it with your own eyes. You simply did not believe that a human being could physically absorb this level of destruction and live to tell the tale. The match was real. The pain was real. The drama was real. Watching from the sidelines, colleagues were screaming, cursing, and calling him a complete idiot. People were asking the Void, "Why are you doing this?" Today, this infamous bout persists as both an epic success and a grim cautionary tale. According to the accounts of those involved, the industry dodged several bullets that day. It is truly astonishing to analyze the footage and realize that a major corporation would allow someone to lose consciousness and then simply continue a live performance. The collateral damage that ensued from that decision is a story of its own. It forces us to ask the hard questions. When does it stop? When is it enough? You pay all day long for the decisions you make for your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But all of us need to look at the wreckage and ask ourselves, was it worth it? The psychology of the hardcore legend. To understand the match, you must first understand the man. Everyone who enters a professional wrestling industry is looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the driving force was an overwhelming need for acceptance. Growing up, he faced constant teasing. That early rejection fueled an insatiable desire to be liked, and ultimately, a desire to capture the World Wrestling Federation Championship. According to Foley's own recollections, the genesis of his extreme style began long before the bright lights of national television. As a sophomore in college, he took a swig of red food coloring and performed a leaping dive off a bed, landing onto a stuffed animal on a concrete floor. When he hit the ground, he spit out the fake blood concoction. The entire dormitory was watching. When one girl yelled out that was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley felt a sudden surge of power. He realized a fundamental truth about his performance art. If he could not make people love him traditionally, perhaps he could captivate them by disgusting them. He simply needed a reaction. Mick Foley would eventually become known as the hardcore legend, the man who survived Hell in a Cell. For modern fans, this match is often the perfect gateway into his catalog. Countless viewers cite it as their first exposure to the sport. Yet, it creates an unrealistic expectation. A normal Mick Foley match was inherently brutal, often featuring blood, thumbtacks, barbed wire, and fire. According to historical records of his tours in Japan, he survived being thrown into plastic explosives and speared through burning tables. He took devastating impacts directly on exposed concrete floors. His daughter, Noelle Foley, and his son, Mickey Foley, grew up watching their father put his body through unimaginable torment just to elicit a visceral reaction from the crowd. Realism was his primary tool. By his own admission, Foley did not feel he had delivered a good performance unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room. He did not enjoy the physical agony, but he deeply enjoyed the artistic process of taking that pain and presenting it to an audience. The birth of mankind. For Colette Foley, Mick's wife of over 35 years, the reality of his career was a heavy burden. When she first met him, she saw a gentle, kind person behind the wild exterior. They bonded over terrible humor and shared a wedding song from Beauty and the Beast. She understood his deep commitment to his craft. She knew that when the adrenaline pumped, he only cared about sending the fans home talking about a great show, entirely at his own risk. This drive led to the creation of his alter ego, Cactus Jack, a wild and unpredictable character who thrived in chaos. With his uncanny charisma, you simply could not take your eyes off him. Jim Cornette, who worked as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, noted that Foley possessed an absolute mastery of ring psychology. He understood that audiences gravitated toward performers who appeared completely out of control, biting opponents, and seeming to go entirely off the script. Foley would take the audience on a frantic ride, pulling the attention squarely onto himself and growing his reputation. In his early years, Foley and his wife slept on a mattress on the floor, watching Japanese wrestling tapes on a barely functioning videocassette recorder for up to 12 hours a day. He was drawn to the storytelling of Japanese deathmatches, where a competitor had to defeat not just their opponent, but the dangerous environment itself. He found a mentor in the legendary Terry Funk, a master at making audiences suspend their disbelief. Together, they engaged in explosive, fiery bouts in Japan, cementing Foley's belief that extreme danger was the only way he could stand out in the industry. However, the World Wrestling Federation of the early to mid-1990s was a general audience-rated product. It was highly sanitized, and Vince McMahon simply did not want Mick Foley. McMahon did not find him marketable or aesthetically appealing. It took the persistence of Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations at the time, to convince McMahon to take a chance on Foley. Ross argued that the company needed fresh, unpredictable opponents for The Undertaker, one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. McMahon had been feeding giant after giant to The Undertaker, resulting in dull programming. Ross insisted they needed a lunatic. According to backstage lore, McMahon finally slammed his hand on a table and agreed to hire Foley, but on one strict condition: they had to cover his face. McMahon viewed Foley as a nobody, demanding that a completely new persona be built from scratch. Thus, Mankind was born. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Fame producer, recalled the immense challenge of building compelling character out of a restrictive mask and a dark storyline. Yet it worked. The concept would have failed with anyone else. But Foley's absolute commitment to the psychology of the character forged a profound connection with the audience. He was willing to try anything. The new challenge for the producers was simply trying to keep him from killing himself. Designing the Descent. The rivalry between Mankind and The Undertaker laid a massive foundation for the company. They battled across the globe in 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television matches. But eventually, the Mankind character plateaued. Foley knew he needed to do something drastic to revitalize his legacy. For the King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the feud using a recently developed structure: Hell in a Cell. The original concept of the cage match required competitors to escape over the top or through a door. It was The Undertaker who had previously asked Vince McMahon to add a roof to the structure, ensuring both men went in, but only one would walk out. The first Hell in a Cell match featured The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. It was a technical masterpiece, setting an impossibly high standard. Foley watched that first bout in awe, knowing he could not physically replicate the athleticism displayed by Michaels. Searching for an edge, Foley consulted his mentor, Terry Funk. During their conversation, Funk jokingly suggested that they start the match on top of the structure and that Foley should be thrown off. While Funk was laughing, Foley stopped and seriously stated that he could actually do it. He could not get the idea out of his head. He casually pitched the terrifying concept to McMahon and The Undertaker. According to those involved, The Undertaker was extremely hesitant to throw his colleague off a 20-foot structure, but Foley was dead set on the idea. Foley did not view this match as the second act of his career. He viewed it as a desperate measure to keep his head above water. Fully believing his time in the spotlight was drawing to a close. He promised The Undertaker he would be all right. Relying on Foley's track record of extreme stunts, the team reluctantly agreed. The first fall. On the night of the event, inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, a packed house of 16,000 people eagerly awaited the showdown. As Foley walked to the ring, the pressure was immense. He had to outdo a legendary match, and he was not a nimble athlete. Jimmy Corderas, a referee and ring crew member, sat backstage watching the monitors alongside Gerald Briscoe, the lead producer. No one in the building knew exactly what to anticipate, but the air was thick with tension. Commentators Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were kept completely in the dark. Foley's goal was to start the bout in a way nobody had ever seen before. As he climbed the steel mesh to the roof, shock rippled through the arena. He was supposed to start inside the cage. What was the logic here? Foley later admitted that despite assuring management he was comfortable, he was actually terrified of heights once he reached the top. As The Undertaker's music echoed through the dark arena, Foley silently wondered how he could gracefully climb back down without ruining his career. But the match officially began on the roof. The structure was held together by plastic zip ties, and it was never designed to support 600 pounds of human weight. With every step the two men took, the metal mesh sagged dangerously. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. The Undertaker brilliantly cut off Foley's attempt to execute a wrestling throw on the unstable roof, knowing they were in grave danger of falling through. Instead, they exchanged heavy punches near the edge of the cage, directly above the commentary tables. Backstage personnel assumed they would never actually execute a fall from that height. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. From 20 feet in the air, the commentary table looked like a tiny piece of dollhouse furniture. Then, the unthinkable happened. A 300-pound man was flung from the edge of the steel roof. To witnesses, the fall seemed to happen in slow motion, yet was over in the blink of an eye. The deafening crash of Foley destroying the announcer table sent a shockwave of sheer terror through the arena. Backstage, the locker room exploded in concern. It was like witnessing a horrific automobile accident. Many genuinely believed Mick Foley was dead. In an industry built on controlled spectacle, no one had ever attempted something this reckless. There was an audible gasp from the crowd, followed by stunned silence. Families watching at home tried to soothe terrified children by insisting it was just a performance, but the fear was palpable. If The Undertaker had thrown him just a fraction too far or too short, Foley would have hit the concrete floor or landed directly on the spectators. The execution of the fall was a dark miracle. Foley managed to turn his body in midair, landing flat to cushion the impact. Spanish commentator Hugo Savanovic had to throw himself out of his chair to avoid being crushed. The professional protocol was to never break character, but this was a terrifying reality. Medical personnel, including World Wrestling Federation physician Dr. Francois Petit, rushed to the wreckage. The unplanned disaster. Dr. Petit, a highly skilled specialist with background in martial arts and sport medicine, found Foley in a catastrophic state. He had landed terribly on his back and suffered a dislocated shoulder. When emergency medical technicians brought a stretcher, they realized it would not fit down the aisle, forcing the production crew to raise the massive steel cell, while the Undertaker remained standing on top of it. Foley was strapped to the gurney. The match appeared to be over. But as the crowd watched him being wheeled away, something inside the hardcore legend snapped. He realized that the longer he stayed on television, the more engaged the audience became. Defying all medical logic and the desperate pleas of his colleagues, Foley slid off the stretcher. Covered in pain, he turned around and began to climb the structure once again. The sheer willpower required to climb that steel mesh with a dislocated shoulder is unfathomable. It was in this exact moment that Mick Foley transitioned from a popular wrestler to an absolute icon. The fans realized they were witnessing a man who simply could not be stopped. However, the next chapter of this match was a genuine disaster. The planned storyline was for The Undertaker to perform a choke slam, causing the mesh to gradually give way, allowing Foley to be safely lowered into the ring. Instead, as the impact occurred, the roof completely surrendered. The mesh panel tore open, and Foley plummeted straight down, crashing violently onto the solid wooden ring mat. The ring is not a soft trampoline. It is built on rigid steel and wood, feeling much like solid cement. To make matters worse, a heavy steel folding chair fell from the hole directly behind Foley, smashing violently into his face upon impact. This second fall was entirely unscripted and infinitely more dangerous than the first. Backstage, the panic reached a fever pitch. Colleagues frantically tried to call the executives. Colette Foley, watching at home with her young children, saw her husband lying completely motionless. Foley had been legitimately knocked unconscious for the first time in his career. Dr. Petit, Terry Funk, and other personnel flooded the ring. Dr. Petit looked at Foley's unresponsive eyes and told The Undertaker that the match had to stop. The Undertaker instructed Funk to check if Foley was even still breathing. According to the data, Foley lost 42 seconds of his memory. In a brilliant display of veteran instinct, Terry Funk initiated a brief physical altercation with The Undertaker to distract the audience and buy the medical team precious time. In any other era, this match would have been immediately terminated. But in 1998, they did not stop matches. They bought time. The price of immortality. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was Terry Funk's shoes. The realization that he was still in the middle of a live broadcast hit him, and incredibly, he dragged himself to his feet. He was a complete mess. He had a massive, gaping wound underneath his lip. Ever the showman, Foley realized that if he stuck his tongue to the hole in his face, It would create a terrifying and unforgettable television visual. As the cameras zoomed in, Foley smiled. Lodged inside his nostril was one of his own teeth. Medical staff later deduced that the steel chair had knocked the tooth into his throat, and as he gasped for air, he forcefully inhaled it up into his nasal passage. The match continued. The pain, the drama, and the profound concern on the faces of everyone involved were entirely real. Foley's eyes were completely vacant, yet he insisted on executing one final, agonizing sequence, a bump into thousands of steel thumbtacks. He purposely rolled around on the canvas to ensure his body was covered in them. When adrenaline takes over to this extreme degree, a performer becomes part of the pain, completely unaware of how far past the limit they have pushed themselves. Finally, after 17 grueling minutes, the match concluded with The Undertaker securing the victory. The 16,000 fans in Pittsburgh had witnessed a terrifying spectacle that fundamentally changed the industry. Foley refused to stretcher a second time, walking out on his own power to a thunderous, emotional roar from the crowd. Backstage, the reality of the situation set in. Vince McMahon approached Foley, thanked him for his incredible sacrifice, but sternly made him promise to never do anything like that again. Meanwhile, Dr. Petit began the agonizing process of plucking thumbtacks out of Foley's flesh, while Foley, still highly concussed, absent-mindedly asked The Undertaker if they had remembered to use the thumbtacks. The physical toll was staggering. Foley suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, the loss of 2 teeth, and required 15 stitches below his lip. He was so severely compromised that his wife had to physically undress him and put him to bed that night. Colette was furious, feeling betrayed that he had taken such extreme risks while their children watched. A cautionary tale. The Hell in a Cell match sparked a massive career renaissance for Mick Foley. Within 6 months, the man Vince McMahon once deemed unmarketable was the world champion. However, the psychological trap of being the hardcore legend meant the bar was constantly raised. Foley felt an overwhelming obligation to over-deliver for the audience, constantly testing the absolute limits of human endurance. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed the boundaries again in an infamous I Quit match against The Rock. Despite warnings from producers about excessive blood loss, Foley insisted on a brutal script. The original plan called for him to take 5 unshielded chair shots to the head, while his hands were handcuffed behind his back. Instead, he absorbed a sickening 11 shots. For his family, it was one of the worst days of their lives. His young children sat in the front row, traumatized by the violence. His daughter Noelle later admitted that she possesses 0 childhood memories of her father actually wrestling, heavily implying that her brain blocked out the trauma. Foley suffered legitimate brain damage for a television storyline. According to medical professionals, the accumulation of severe concussions equates to repeatedly experiencing 25-mile-per-hour car accidents. Foley was warned by an independent neurologist that he should never wrestle again, but the addiction to the roar of the crowd was too powerful. He continued to chase that feeling, trying to delay the inevitable decline of his physical health. Legacy and reflection. Today, the long-term effects of repetitive brain trauma, specifically chronic traumatic encephalopathy, loom as a dark cloud over Foley's future. His family lives with the daily anxiety of not knowing how his cognitive health will deteriorate in the next 10 or 20 years. Foley himself has admitted to experiencing severe memory lapses, getting lost while driving in his own neighborhood. Yet, he refuses to surrender to fear. To combat the cognitive decline, Foley engages in spoken word tours across the globe, utilizing the stage as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp. The stimulation of the audience continues to fuel him, substituting the violent roar of the arena with the respectful applause of theaters. Mick Foley is a multiple-time champion, a philanthropist, and a legendary storyteller, but he will forever be defined by Hell in a Cell. For years, he harbored deep resentment toward that night, feeling trapped by a single moment. It took a quiet conversation with The Undertaker, who reminded him that what they created that night would outlive them both, for Foley to finally embrace his legacy. During a visit to corporate archives, Foley and his daughter unexpectedly stumbled upon the original steel cell. In a rare moment of profound vulnerability, the hardcore legend touched the rusted metal and began to weep. It was a stark realization of how easily that night could have been his last. The audience comes to professional wrestling to be put in awe, and very few people in human history can genuinely command that emotion. Mick Foley sacrificed his body, his mind, and his future to earn the acceptance of total strangers. There were bumps in the road, and the physical cost was terrifyingly high, but he created surreal, sublime performance art. When we look back at the descent of mankind, we are forced to respect the absolute dedication of a man who gave his heart and soul to the business. We must also recognize it as a stark warning, a chaotic masterpiece that changed the landscape of sports entertainment forever. The dark side of the ring, the descent of mankind. Scene start. Narrator, sports commentator ladies and gentlemen, step back with me into the annals of professional wrestling history. In all my years sitting at the announcer's desk, analyzing psychology, the physical toll, and the absolute spectacle of the squared circle, there are certain nights that forever alter the landscape of the industry. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view event, a single match would carve its place as one of the most shocking, terrifying, and awe-inspiring exhibitions ever broadcast. The match was The Undertaker versus Mankind. The battleground was Hell in a Cell. According to the accounts of those who witnessed it, Hell in a Cell hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. As an analyst, I knew the concept was going to be chaotic, but no one could have anticipated the sheer magnitude of the madness that was about to unfold. In that ring, you had two generational talents who loved nothing more than to push the envelope until it teetered over the absolute edge. People on the outside looking in often say that professional wrestling is a performance. But let me tell you this, you cannot fake gravity. I have been frightened by a multitude of things in the world of professional wrestling, but nothing chilled my blood quite like this match did. What left fans completely stunned was the unrelenting, unimaginable punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind a Mankind mask, endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply would not believe that a human being could physically undergo such trauma and survive. This match was real. The pain was undeniably real. The drama was palpable. Backstage, peers and producers were cursing, screaming, calling him a fool, asking the universe, "Why are you doing this?" Today, the legacy of that fateful night persists as both an epic success story and a chilling cautionary tale. As we look back, it becomes clear that the industry dodged several fatal bullets that night. It remains deeply jarring to consider that a performer could be rendered unconscious, only for the match to continue. You pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but according to the reflections of those involved, we must all ask ourselves the ultimate question. Was it truly worth it? Part 1. The Anatomy of a Hardcore Legend. Narrator. To understand the destruction, we must first analyze a man. Everyone who steps into the world of professional wrestling is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the origins of his reckless style trace back to his youth. By his own admission, he was teased heavily growing up, which birthed an overwhelming, almost desperate need to be accepted and liked. Accounts from his college days reveal a fascinating psychological profile. As a sophomore, Foley once took a mouthful of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor. When he spat out the simulated blood, he heard a girl in the dormitory declare it the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that moment, Foley found power. His philosophy evolved. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could captivate them by disgusting them. He needed reactions. He became Mick Foley, the hardcore legend who would ultimately survive Hell in a Cell. But Hell in a Cell is merely a gateway. Many fans cite it as their introduction to the sport. However, a standard Mick Foley match was an exploration of brutality. We are talking about matches involving fire, barbed wire, falling onto concrete, and even absorbing blasts from plastic explosives in Japan. He pushed his body to the absolute limit. According to his daughter, Noelle Foley, her father thrived on eliciting reactions of pure shock from the audience. Realism was his greatest tool. Foley himself noted that he did not feel he had delivered a good performance unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain, but he mastered the art of absorbing it and selling it to the audience in a way that captivated millions. Those closest to him saw the duality of the man. His wife of over 35 years, Colette Foley, recalls noticing his gentle eyes and terrible sense of humor when they first met. Their wedding song was Beauty and the Beast, a fitting metaphor for the gentle soul who transformed into a monster for crowds when the adrenaline pumped. His singular drive was to ensure the audience left talking about the show, often at massive risk to his own well-being. Part 2, The Journey to the Cell. Narrator. Before Mankind, there was Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable persona that made audiences question his sanity. Legendary manager and producer Jim Cornette noted that Foley was a master of in-ring psychology. He understood that fans were drawn to performers who seemed entirely out of control, who appeared to be defying the script. By taking the audience on that unpredictable ride, Foley commanded their attention and his reputation swelled. In his early days, Foley's dedication was obsessive. He would spend up to 12 hours a day watching Japanese wrestling tapes on a broken television, studying the realism and the storytelling. In Japan, wrestling was not just about defeating an opponent. It was about surviving the environment. This drew the attention of promoters looking for a foreign talent to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Funk, a master at making audiences suspend their disbelief, became a mentor to Foley. Together, they engaged in explosive, fiery deathmatches. Foley viewed these extreme environments as his proving ground, a place to stand out. He never envisioned himself in the World Wrestling Federation, which at the time was entrenched in a general audience, family-friendly era. His violent style simply did not fit the corporate mold. According to former wrestler Al Snow, the chairman of the company, Vince McMahon, initially had no interest in hiring Mick Foley. He did not find him marketable. It was Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations at the time, who convinced McMahon to take a chance. Ross needed compelling opponents for The Undertaker, one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. McMahon had repeatedly booked giant, lumbering opponents against The Undertaker, which resulted in dull encounters. Ross argued that what The Undertaker truly needed was a lunatic. Legend has it that McMahon slammed his hand on a table and agreed to bring Foley in, but under one strict condition: they would cover his face. He would be a nameless, faceless entity. Hall of Famer Gerald Briscoe recalled the challenge of building a character out of thin air. Thus, Mankind was born, and it was a bizarre, psychological character that would only have worked because of Mick Foley's absolute commitment. Without that deep connection to the audience, the character would have failed. The strategy worked. Mankind and The Undertaker laid a massive foundation, battling across the globe in 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches. But eventually, the character plateaued. Foley knew he needed to do something monumental to elevate their legacy, rather than let it fade. Part 3, The Climb. Narrator. This brings us back to the summer of 1998. Producers planned to reignite the Mankind and Undertaker rivalry using a relatively new concept: Hell in a Cell. Traditionally, a cage match required a wrestler to escape over the top or through the door. The innovation of Hell in a Cell was adding a roof. You go in and there is no escape. The first iteration of this match featured The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, a technical masterpiece that set an impossibly high standard. Foley faced immense pressure. How could he, a brawler lacking the nimble athleticism of Shawn Michaels, possibly outdo that first match? According to the accounts, Foley consulted his mentor, Terry Funk. In a moment of passing humor, Funk joked that they should start the match on the roof of the cage, and Foley should be thrown off. What started as a laugh took root in Foley's mind. He pitched the idea casually to McMahon and The Undertaker. The Undertaker was highly hesitant, but Foley was resolute. He viewed this match not as a career renaissance, but as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water before retiring. When June 28th arrived at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, a sold-out crowd of 16,000 fans had no idea what they were about to witness. Backstage, producer Gerald Briscoe sat at the monitors, commanding the broadcast like a pilot. Commentators Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were kept entirely in the dark. As Mankind's music hit, he bypassed the door and began to climb the steel structure. The crowd, the announcers, and the officials were in sheer shock. Foley had assured management that he was comfortable with heights, but in truth, he was terrified. Yet, he continued his ascent, daring The Undertaker to join him. The match officially began almost 20 feet in the air. The danger was immediate. The roof was secured only by plastic zip ties. With nearly 600 pounds of human weight shifting on the mesh, the ceiling began to sag. Backstage, the sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the monitors. Foley attempted to execute a maneuver, but The Undertaker, sensing the roof was giving way, blocked it. They moved toward the edge of the cell, directly above the Spanish announcer's desk. Backstage officials watched in horror, believing there was zero margin for error. And then it happened. The Undertaker hurled a 300-pound man off the edge of the cell. Time seemed to stop. Mankind plummeted through the air, crashing violently through the announcer's table. Part 4, the car crash. Narrator: the sound of the impact was horrifying. Backstage, the locker room erupted in panic. Witnesses described it as being akin to watching a fatal car accident. No one had ever attempted a stunt of this magnitude. Jim Ross, live on the broadcast, questioned if they had just watched a man perish. The execution of the fall, however, was a testament to Foley's spatial awareness. Mid-air, he rotated his body to land as flat as possible on the desk, a split-second decision that likely saved his life. Still, the trauma was immense. Spanish commentator Hugo Savanovic narrowly avoided being crushed. Terry Funk was the first to reach Foley, checking to see if he was even conscious. Medical personnel, including the company physician Dr. Francois Petit, rushed to ringside. Foley had landed terribly on his back and dislocated his shoulder. The situation was chaotic. Emergency medical technicians struggled to navigate a gurney through the wreckage. The match appeared to be over. Foley was loaded onto the stretcher, and the crowd, recognizing the absolute reality of the situation, fell silent. But the story did not end there. As they wheeled him up the aisle, something stirred within Foley. He realized that the longer he stayed in the public eye, the more engaged the audience became. Against the desperate pleas of officials telling him to stay down, Foley rolled off the gurney. Covered in bruises, he marched back to the ring and began to climb the cell for a second time. The audience was bewildered. The sheer endurance on display cemented Mick Foley as an absolute legend in that very moment. Part 5, the unplanned disaster. Narrator: the next phase of the match was supposed to be controlled. The plan was for a choke slam on the roof, causing the mesh to sag further, creating a compelling visual. But structural integrity failed. When The Undertaker delivered the choke slam, the roof completely gave way. Foley plummeted uncontrollably, plummeting straight down to the solid wooden ring canvas below. This was not a stunt. This was a catastrophic failure. To make matters worse, as Foley fell, a heavy steel folding chair followed him down, striking him directly in the face upon impact. Backstage, the panic was absolute. Foley's family, watching at home, were completely traumatized. His wife could not reach anyone on the telephone. In the ring, Foley lay completely motionless. For the first time in his career, he was legitimately knocked unconscious. Dr. Petit and Terry Funk rushed into cage. The Undertaker, looking down from the broken roof, instructed Funk to check if Foley was still breathing. Funk relayed that he was. There are 42 seconds of this match that Foley simply does not remember, in an incredible display of improvisation. Terry Funk initiated a physical altercation with The Undertaker to buy the medical staff crucial time to evaluate Foley. By all objective medical standards, the match should have been stopped. But in that era of professional wrestling, matches were rarely halted. Performers simply bought time. When Foley regained consciousness, the first thing he saw were Terry Funk's shoes. Realizing he was still in the match, he managed to stagger to his feet. He was heavily bleeding from a massive wound under his lip. In a deeply disturbing yet brilliant display of showmanship, Foley pushed his tongue to the hole in his lip to create a gruesome visual for the television cameras. A tooth, knocked loose by the steel chair, had somehow lodged in his nasal cavity. The pain was agonizingly real. Yet, Foley insisted on finishing the match, demanding they introduce thumbtacks into the ring. After enduring further punishment, falling onto the tacks, the 17-minute ordeal finally concluded with The Undertaker securing the victory. The crowd of 16,000 went absolutely insane. Foley had risked his very existence, and in return, the audience bestowed upon him their absolute, unwavering belief. Part 6. The Aftermath and the Echoes of Trauma. Narrator. When Foley finally passed the curtain, the backstage area rushed to check on him. Vince McMahon approached him, expressing deep gratitude for his sacrifice, but strictly warning him never to do anything like that again. The physical toll was staggering. 15 stitches, a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, lost teeth, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, and a severe concussion. Yet, professionally, it was a triumph. The match completely changed the trajectory of his career. Within 6 months, the man McMahon once deemed unmarketable was crowned the world champion. However, the bar had been raised to a terrifying height. Foley felt a constant pressure to live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. Just 7 months later, he pushed the limits once again in an infamous I Quit match against The Rock. Against the advice of his peers, Foley instructed his opponent to strike him with a steel chair without holding back. The plan was to take 5 chair shots while his hands were handcuffed behind his back. Instead, the situation escalated. Foley absorbed 11 unprotected strikes to the head. According to his daughter Noelle, the footage is sickening to watch. The trauma inflicted upon his brain for the sake of a television storyline raises profound ethical questions. At a time when the long-term effects of concussions were not widely understood in the sports world, Foley was accumulating brain damage. Medical professionals have since compared the impact of taking falls in the ring to being involved in a 25-mile-per-hour car accident. Foley eventually faced the harsh reality of his choices. Independent neurologists advised him to retire, warning that continued physical trauma would leave him crippled. He suffered from severe memory loss, sometimes forgetting where he lived while driving. Today, the specter of chronic traumatic encephalopathy looms over his legacy. It is a terrifying, progressive brain disease associated with repeated head trauma. Foley's family lives with the constant anxiety of how his health will deteriorate in 10 or 20 years. To combat cognitive decline, Foley has turned to spoken word tours, viewing the performances as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp. He refuses to live in complete fear, choosing instead to appreciate the life he built. Conclusion, was it worth it? Narrator. Professional wrestlers don costumes and engage in a grueling physical performance art, often leaving the arena in far worse condition than they arrived, all to earn the acceptance of total strangers. For Mick Foley, it was always about the reaction. The roar of the crowd was an addiction, a driving force that led to his immense success, but also his permanent physical suffering. For years, Foley harbored resentment toward Hell in a Cell, frustrated that his entire, multifaceted career was overshadowed by a single night of extreme violence. But as time passed, he found peace. A conversation with The Undertaker helped him realize that what they created that night would outlive them both. According to a poignant account, Foley and his daughter recently visited the World Wrestling Entertainment warehouse. Upon seeing the original steel cell, Foley touched the metal and began to weep. It was a profound realization of his own mortality. He survived that structure, but the risks were astronomically high. As a sports journalist, I look at the data, the injuries, and the medical science of today, and I must report that there is no reward big enough to justify that level of risk. Foley himself admits that while we did not understand head injuries back then, he cannot say with certainty he would have changed his actions. Hell in a Cell remains a masterpiece of athletic storytelling. It is a testament to the absolute limits of human endurance. It gave us a magical, surreal spectacle, but it also serves as a haunting reminder of the dark side of the ring, leaving us all to wonder about the heavy price of becoming a legend. The Shadow of the Cell, the Mick Foley story. The date was June 28, 1998. The setting, the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view event inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, packed with 16,000 expectant fans. What they were about to witness would not just etch itself into the annals of professional wrestling history. It would alter the very parameters of human endurance in sports entertainment. This was The Undertaker versus Mankind inside Hell in a Cell. It is a match that hits the viewer like a physical blow to the consciousness. Even the most seasoned wrestling veterans, those who anticipated chaos, were left completely unmoored by the sheer magnitude of the risks taken that night. In the ring were two talents who lived to push the envelope, but on this night, they pushed it entirely over the edge. As the old industry adage goes, the storylines may be predetermined, but you absolutely cannot fake gravity. The psychology of the hardcore legend. To understand the sheer danger and the relentless punishment endured in that cage, one must first understand the mind of the man known as Mankind. Mick Foley. Every individual who steps into a wrestling ring is fundamentally searching for something missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the genesis of his career was rooted in a profound need for acceptance. He was a young man who faced relentless teasing, cultivating an overwhelming hunger to be liked, and ultimately, a burning desire to capture the World Wrestling Federation Championship. The records show a fascinating psychological profile. According to Foley's own recollections, his defining moment of realization did not happen in a wrestling ring, but in a college dormitory during his sophomore year. Seeking a reaction, he swallowed red food coloring and launched himself off a bed onto a concrete floor, violently expelling the fake blood. The visceral disgust of the onlookers did not shame him. It empowered him. He realized a crucial formula. If he could not force the world to love him, he could certainly command their attention by shocking them. This philosophy became the foundation of his career. Realism was his greatest tool. Foley did not consider a match successful unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room. It was never about a masochistic enjoyment of pain, but rather the artistic satisfaction of absorbing punishment and selling it to an audience in a way that captivated them. He developed the persona of Cactus Jack, a character known for wild, erratic, and seemingly insane behavior. Wrestling agent and producer Jim Cornette noted that Foley possessed an undeniable charisma and a masterful grasp of ring psychology. He understood that audiences craved unpredictability. By leaning into chaos, Foley ensured the spotlight remained firmly fixed upon him. The road to the Federation. Before the mainstream lights, Foley's training ground was the brutal circuit of Japanese death matches. His apartment furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor and a television playing 12 hours of Japanese wrestling tapes a day. He was drawn to the storytelling of these matches, where the environment itself was an adversary. It was in Japan that Foley found a mentor in Terry Funk, widely regarded as a master making audiences suspend their disbelief. Together, they engaged in explosive, violent, and fiery encounters. Foley embraced the extreme, believing that rolling through thumbtacks and barbed wire was tangible proof that he had created something special. He assumed his career would remain in Japan, far away from the polished, general audience product of the World Wrestling Federation. In fact, The chairman of the World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon, initially had zero interest in hiring Foley. McMahon did not see a marketable or attractive superstar. It took the persistence of Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations, to convince McMahon to take a chance. The World Wrestling Federation desperately needed dynamic opponents for their marquee star, The Undertaker. They had exhausted a parade of giant challengers, which yielded dull results. They needed a chaotic foil. The document suggests McMahon finally agreed to bring Foley in, but with a strict condition. Foley's face must be covered. McMahon viewed him as a nobody. From this harsh executive perception, the character Mankind was born, a masked, deranged figure. Yet, as wrestling veteran Gerald Briscoe observed, this fabricated persona would have failed with anyone else. Foley's total commitment gave a pulse. He threw himself into the character completely, because he knew that without an authentic connection to the audience, the gimmick was meaningless. The architecture of Hell in a Cell. Foley and The Undertaker built a formidable rivalry, battling across the globe through 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches. However, by 1998, Foley felt his character was plateauing. He was desperate to add to their legacy rather than detract from it. He approached this match not as a launch pad to a new era, but as a final, desperate effort to keep his career afloat. He truly believed his time in the spotlight was nearing its end. The concept of Hell in a Cell was relatively new. Traditional cage matches involved escaping over the top or through a door. The innovation here was a roof, a sealed environment where 2 men enter and only one leaves. The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had contested the first Hell in a Cell match, setting an impossibly high standard. Foley, self-admittedly lacking nimbleness, watched that first match in awe, knowing he had to somehow outdo it. The inspiration for what happened next came from a casual, joking conversation with Terry Funk. Funk laughingly suggested starting the match on the roof of the cage and getting thrown off. While Funk meant it in jest, the idea took root in Foley's mind. He pitched the concept to The Undertaker and Vince McMahon, confidently selling them on the idea. Despite the fact that he was secretly terrified of heights and had never actually stood on top of the structure, The Undertaker was understandably hesitant, but Foley's sheer determination eventually won out. The fall that stopped time. As the match was officially announced, the tension in the arena was palpable. No one knew what to anticipate. Foley made his entrance and, to the shock of the commentators, the officials, and the fans, he began to scale the outside of the cage. The audience was bewildered. When both men stood atop the cell, a terrifying reality set in. The roof was secured only by plastic zip ties. Under the combined weight of 600 pounds, the metal mesh began to sag dangerously. Observers backstage, including referee Jimmy Corderas, could hear the zip ties physically snapping. Foley attempted a maneuver near the edge of the cage. The Undertaker, realizing the structural integrity of the roof was failing, reversed it. They edged closer to the precipice, looming over the Spanish announcer's desk. To the commentators, including Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, the idea of a 300-pound man falling from nearly 20 feet seemed too dangerous to fathom. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. And then time seemed to stand still. Foley was hurled from the top of the structure. He plummeted through the air, crashing violently through the commentator's table below. The sound of the impact echoed through the arena, a sickening crash that left the backstage area paralyzed with fear. It was likened to witnessing a horrific automobile accident. Many believed, in that exact second, that Mick Foley was dead. The reality of professional wrestling often blurs the lines of fiction, but this was undeniable, terrifying reality. Had the trajectory of the throw been altered by mere inches, Foley could have missed the table entirely, landing on bare concrete or directly into the crowd. Miraculously, in midair, Foley had possessed the presence of mind to rotate his body, landing as flat as possible to cushion the blow. Medical personnel, including Dr. Francois Petit, rushed to the wreckage. Foley was loaded onto a medical gurney, his shoulder dislocated, his body battered. The audience and the television crew believed the broadcast was essentially over. The second fall, a disaster unplanned. But Mick Foley's drive to captivate the audience overrode basic human survival instincts, realizing that the longer he stayed on the television screens, the more invested the audience became. He rejected the medical personnel. To the absolute disbelief of everyone in the arena and watching at home, a broken Foley rose from the gurney and began climbing the cell a second time. The backstage crew was frantic. The commentators questioned his sanity. Yet, this exact moment of defiance solidified his status as a legendary figure. The plan upon returning to the roof was relatively straightforward, a maneuver that would safely dent the mesh for a visual effect. However, the structural damage from earlier had compromised the cage. When The Undertaker executed the maneuver, the roof completely gave way. This was not planned. This was a catastrophic failure. Foley plummeted through the open roof, free falling to the solid ring mat below, a surface closer to solid cement than a cushion. Worse still, a heavy metal folding chair fell through the opening directly behind him, striking him brutally in the face upon impact. Backstage, panic erupted. The first fall was a calculated, albeit massive, risk. This second fall was an uncontrolled disaster. Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious for 42 agonizing seconds. The Undertaker, looking down from the broken roof, signaled to Terry Funk in the ring to check if Foley was still breathing. When Foley finally regained consciousness, his first sight was Terry Funk's shoes. Operating on pure instinct and adrenaline, he willed himself to stand. His face was a horrific mass of damage. He had suffered a dislocated jaw, a bruised kidney, and a severe laceration beneath his lip, in a bizarre and shocking visual. One of his knocked-out teeth had been pushed up through his nasal cavity, lodging in his nose. Yet, ever performer, Foley actively tried to stick his tongue through the wound in his lip to create a lasting television image. The match continued. Foley, operating in a deep state of concussion, even introduced thousands of metal thumbtacks into the ring, purposefully rolling in them to ensure the audience received the maximum spectacle. After 17 excruciating minutes, the match finally concluded. The toll of the spotlight. The aftermath of hell in a cell was complex. Vince McMahon personally thanked Foley for his incredible sacrifice, but demanded he never attempt anything like it again. Foley required 15 stitches and extensive medical treatment. Yet, professionally, the match was a monumental success. It catalyzed a career renaissance, transforming Foley from a marginalized character into a World Wrestling Federation champion within 6 months. However, the bar for extreme performance had been raised, and Foley felt immense pressure to continually clear it. Just 7 months later, he engaged in an I Quit match against The Rock, an encounter that pushed the boundaries of violence even further. Despite warnings from officials, Foley absorbed 11 unprotected strikes to the head with a steel chair. The physical toll of these decisions was devastating, particularly on his family. His wife, Colette, and his daughter, Noelle, lived with a constant, agonizing fear for his life. The injuries sustained for the sake of a television storyline resulted in genuine, long-lasting trauma. Today, the medical community understands far more about the long-term effects of concussions and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Foley was repeatedly warned by neurologists to cease performing, warnings he often ignored in pursuit of one more great match. He now lives with the severe, chronic consequences of those choices, facing an uncertain future regarding his neurological health. When Foley and his daughter recently visited the company warehouse and stood before the original hell in a cell structure, the weight of history crashed down upon him. He wept. It was a profound realization of how close he had come to losing everything for the roar of the crowd. Was it worth it? It is the haunting question that lingers over the legacy of Mick Foley. He sacrificed his physical well-being for the acceptance of total strangers, creating moments of surreal, sublime performance art that will undoubtedly outlive him. He earned his place as a beloved legend, but that immortality was purchased at an incredibly steep and permanent physical price. In the end, Hell in a Cell remains professional wrestling's ultimate cautionary tale, a dangerously crazy masterpiece that forever changed the industry and the man who survived it. Dark Side of the Ring, The Descent of Mankind. Prologue, The Weight of Gravity. In the theatrical world of professional wrestling, the line between breathtaking illusion and bone-shattering reality is often blurred. But on June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view, that line was not just crossed. It was completely obliterated. The matchup was set, The Undertaker versus Mankind, locked inside the unforgiving steel structure known as Hell in a Cell. According to the accounts of those who witnessed it, the structure itself hits the consciousness like a heavy mallet. It was designed to contain chaos, to push talents to the envelope. But on this night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, before an eager crowd of 16,000 fans, the envelope did not just tear, it fell completely over the edge. As the old industry adage goes, professional wrestling may be a performance, but you cannot fake gravity. What unfolded that night left audiences and industry veterans alike absolutely stunned. It was an unrelenting display of physical punishment endured by one man, Mick Foley. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply could not believe that a human being could physically endure such trauma and live to tell the tale. The pain was real. The drama was real. The sheer terror echoing through the arena was real. This match stands as one of the most infamous spectacles in the history of sports entertainment. Its legacy persists today as a paradox, an epic, unforgettable success, and a harrowing cautionary tale. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But as we peel back the layers of collateral damage, the long-term physical toll, and the psychological drive behind the madness, all of us need to ask ourselves a very difficult question. Was it worth it? Chapter 1, The Architecture of a Lunatic. To understand the madness of Hell in a Cell, one must first understand the man behind the mask. Everyone who steps into the squared circle is looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the drive was rooted in a profound need for acceptance. As recounted by Foley himself, he was teased relentlessly in his youth, fostering an overwhelming desire to be liked, to be validated, and ultimately to hold the World Wrestling Federation Championship belt. Documents and interviews suggest this extreme pursuit began early, during his sophomore year of college. Foley once took a swig of red food coloring and performed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor. As he spat the red liquid onto the ground, a female onlooker expressed sheer disgust. In that moment, Foley did not feel shame. He felt power. If he could not make people love him, he reasoned perhaps he could captivate them by disgusting them. He needed to elicit a reaction. This was the genesis of the hardcore legend. Foley's path was not paved with traditional wrestling tropes. According to his daughter, Noelle Foley, and his longtime friend, former superstar Al Snow, a normal match for Mick was inherently brutal. We're talking about barbed wire, fire, thumbtacks, falling onto solid concrete, and even enduring composition. See 4 explosives in Japanese death matches. Realism was his primary tool. By his own admission, Foley did not believe he had a good match unless he had trouble walking back to his hotel room. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain itself, but he relished his ability to absorb it and project it in a way that captivated the audience. His wife of over 35 years, Colette Foley, saw the duality of the man. She saw his gentle eyes and terrible sense of humor. Their wedding song was fittingly Beauty and the Beast. But she also understood his relentless commitment. When the adrenaline pumped, he wanted the audience to leave talking about his performance, even at the cost of his own physical safety. This commitment birthed the persona of Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable figure who wrestled with a reckless psychology that made fans believe he was genuinely out of his mind. Mentored by the legendary Terry Funk, Foley learned how to make an audience suspend their disbelief in a matter of seconds. Foley felt at home in the violent, story-driven death matches of Japan. He never envisioned himself as a fit for the World Wrestling Federation. Chapter 2, Creating Mankind. At that time, the World Wrestling Federation was operating under a general audience rating. The product was widely considered bland, and Foley's explosive, violent style did not naturally gel with the corporate vision. According to sources, Chairman Vince McMahon explicitly did not want Mick Foley. McMahon believed Foley lacked marketability and the traditional cosmetic appeal required for a superstar. However, Jim Ross, who served as Vice President of Talent Relations, saw a unique connection with the audience. Ross needed dynamic opponents for The Undertaker, one of the biggest stars in the history of the industry. The company had spent months feeding Giant, lumbering opponents to The Undertaker, which resulted in dull, uninspiring television. What the franchise truly needed was a lunatic. Ross pleaded with McMahon to trust his eye for talent. McMahon finally relented, allegedly slamming his hand on a table and declaring that he would bring Foley in, but under one strict condition: they had to cover his face. McMahon wanted to obscure Foley entirely, branding him as a nobody. From this rejection, the character of Mankind was born. Producer Gerald Briscoe noted the monumental challenge of building a character out of essentially nothing. Yet, this bizarre, deranged persona would not have worked with anyone other than Mick Foley. Audiences possess a sixth sense for authenticity. They sense Foley's total commitment to the character. As the saying goes, he didn't turn anything down but the bed covers. The pairing was a massive success. Mankind and The Undertaker traveled the globe, laying a foundation across 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television matches. But eventually, the feud plateaued. Foley knew he needed to do something monumental to ensure their legacy. Chapter 3: The Joke That Became a Nightmare. Approaching the 1998 King of the Ring, producers aimed to reignite the rivalry using a newly developed concept: Hell in a Cell. Traditional cage matches required a competitor to climb over the top or escape through a door. Foley approached Vince McMahon with a revolutionary idea. Put a roof on the cage. Both men go in, but only one comes out. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match featured The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, establishing a staggering milestone for violence and storytelling. Watching from the sidelines, Foley was open-jawed, realizing he possessed none of the athletic agility of Michaels. 9 months later, he was scheduled to step into that same structure with The Undertaker. Seeking advice, Foley consulted his mentor, Terry Funk. According to Foley, Funk began laughing and suggested a preposterous idea. What if you started the match on top of the cell? And what if you were thrown off? Funk meant it as a joke. But the laughter stopped when Foley looked at him and said he thought he could do it. The idea became an obsession. Foley pitched the dangerous stunt to The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon in a casual conversation. Initially, The Undertaker was hesitant, but Foley's determination and the backing of the creative team eventually won them over. Foley was not viewing this match as the second act of his career. He was simply trying to keep his head above water, believing his run in the spotlight was nearing its end. Chapter 4: The Flight of Icarus. On that fateful June night in Pittsburgh, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Commentators Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were entirely in the dark, unaware of the spectacle that had been planned behind closed doors. Referee Jimmy Corderas and producer Gerald Briscoe watched from the backstage monitors, holding their breath as the pilot of the broadcast. As the ominous structure lowered, Foley, completely defying logic and expectation, began to climb the outside of the steel mesh. Backstage, shock rippled through the locker room. Foley had assured McMahon and The Undertaker that he was comfortable on top of the cell. In reality, he was terrified of heights. As The Undertaker made his grueling entrance, Foley stood nearly 20 feet in the air, internally panicking about how to safely descend without ruining his career. The match officially began on the roof. Instantly, a terrifying variable emerged. The top section of the cage was secured only by plastic zip ties, under the combined weight of nearly 600 pounds. The mesh began to sag by roughly a foot with every step. The horrifying sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. Foley attempted to execute a suplex on top of the precarious mesh, but the Undertaker, realizing the imminent danger of the cage giving way, cut the maneuver off. The two heavyweights gravitated toward the edge of the cell, directly above the Spanish announcer table. Those watching assumed they would tease the edge and retreat. There was absolutely zero margin for error. Below them, the announcer table looked like a fragile piece of dollhouse furniture. Then it happened. A 300-pound human being was flung from the heavens, as strange as it sounds. Witnesses described the moment passing in both slow motion and the blink of an eye. Mick Foley plummeted nearly 20 feet, crashing violently through the table. Holy goodness! Did we just see what we thought we saw? The sickening crash silenced the arena before an audible gasp of pure horror washed over the crowd. Backstage, personnel exploded in concern. It was akin to witnessing a fatal automobile accident. To many, it appeared that Mick Foley had just died on live television. Spanish commentator Hugo Savanovic had barely managed to dive out of the way. Traumatized, he watched his friend lay motionless in the wreckage, torn by the strict industry rule against breaking character to interfere. Terry Funk was the first to reach the rubble, desperately asking Foley if he was conscious. Dr. Francois Petit, a martial arts expert and the company's resident medical professional, was urgently summoned from the back. Foley had landed disastrously on his back, further aggravating a dislocated shoulder. Emergency medical technicians rushed to the scene. Because the gurney would not fit through the aisle, the massive cell had to be raised with the Undertaker still standing on top of it. Foley was strapped to the board. The match, it seemed, was definitively over. Chapter 5, The Second Fall. But professional wrestling is an industry built on the defiance of reality. As Foley lay on the gurney, the cheers of the crowd seeped into his concussed mind. He realized that his continued presence elevated the audience's engagement to unprecedented heights. Against the frantic pleas of officials, medical staff, and his peers, Foley rose from the gurney. Battered, bruised, and moving on pure instinct, he began to climb the cell once again. If the first fall was a calculated, albeit insane, stunt, what happened next was a horrifying accident. The planned storyline called for The Undertaker to deliver a chokeslam on top of the cell, with the expectation that the mesh would gradually yield, creating a dramatic visual of Foley being stuffed downward. But when The Undertaker hoisted Foley by the throat and drove him into steel, the battered zip ties completely surrendered. The mesh gave way instantly. Foley plummeted through the roof of the cell, crashing directly onto the solid ring mat below, a surface backed by unforgiving concrete. As he fell, a heavy steel folding chair followed him through the abyss, striking him squarely in the face upon impact. Backstage, the reaction transitioned from shock to sheer terror. This was not part of the plan. This was an unscripted catastrophe. Foley lay completely lifeless. For the first time in his storied career, the hardcore legend was legitimately knocked unconscious. He would later reveal that he lost exactly 42 seconds of memory. His wife, Colette, watching at home with their 2 young children, was furious, believing her husband had betrayed her by hiding this second near-fatal stunt. Industry veterans flooded the cage. Dr. Petit and Terry Funk rushed into the ring. The Undertaker, looking down from the broken roof, instructed Funk to check if Foley was even breathing. Desperate to buy time and divert the camera's focus, Funk legitimately provoked The Undertaker, resulting in Funk receiving a chokeslam of his own. This was a match that, by any modern medical or ethical standard, should have been immediately stopped. But in that era, matches were not stopped. Time was merely bought. Chapter 6, The Price of Immortality. When Foley finally regained consciousness, his first sight was Terry Funk's shoes. The realization hit him. He was still in the match. In a display of incomprehensible endurance, Foley managed to stand. The television cameras captured a grotesque, yet iconic image. Foley had suffered a massive wound beneath his lip, ever the showman, He pushed his tongue through the open laceration to create a legendary visual for the broadcast. Adding to the horror, a tooth had been completely knocked out by the falling chair and had somehow lodged itself inside his nostril. The expressions of the officials in the ring were not part of the script. They reflected genuine, terrified concern. When Jim Ross looked into Foley's eyes, he saw that nobody was home. Yet, Foley's only coherent demand was to introduce thumbtacks into the match. Scattering thousands of tacks across the ring, Foley purposefully rolled through them, ensuring his body was covered in silver spikes. Driven entirely by adrenaline, he had pushed so far past the threshold of pain that he had become a part of it. Finally, after 17 excruciating minutes, The Undertaker secured the victory. Foley refused a stretcher, walking back up the aisle to an absolutely deafening roar from the Pittsburgh crowd. Backstage, Vince McMahon approached his bruised and bloody warrior. He thanked Foley for everything he had done for the company, but demanded a promise. Foley was never to do anything like that ever again. As medical staff painstakingly plucked thumbtacks from his flesh, Foley, still severely concussed, turned to The Undertaker and asked if they had performed the thumbtack spot. The physical toll was staggering. Foley required 15 stitches underneath his lip. He lost 2 teeth, suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a severe concussion, and a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks. But the psychological reward was exactly what he had sought his entire life. That single 17-minute war completely changed the trajectory of his career. 6 months later, the man who was once deemed unmarketable was crowned the World Wrestling Federation champion. Chapter 7. The Echoes of Trauma. The tragedy of Hell in a Cell is that the bar had been permanently raised. Foley felt an overwhelming pressure to live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed his physical limits once again in a brutal I Quit match against The Rock. Despite warnings from producers regarding excessive blood loss, Foley insisted on proceeding. The script called for Foley to take 5 unprotected steel chair shots to the head while handcuffed. Instead, he absorbed a sickening 11 shots. For his family, the spectacle was deeply traumatizing. His young children sat in the front row, unable to separate the fictional storyline from the factual reality that their father was suffering legitimate brain trauma for a television angle. Daughter Noelle fully admits that she has no singular memory of her father ever wrestling, likely due to a psychological block against the trauma. The medical community eventually intervened, following multiple severe concussions, each equated by experts to a 25-mile-per-hour automobile accident. An independent urologist delivered a grim verdict. Foley should never wrestle again. Today, the specter of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, commonly known as CTE, looms heavily over the Foley family. The long-term effects of repetitive brain trauma are a source of daily anxiety. To combat cognitive decline, Foley now embarks on spoken word tours, utilizing the stage as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp while still chasing the roar of the crowd he so desperately loves. Epilogue: The Warehouse of Memories. We dress up in wild costumes, engaging in a fantasy form of combat that leaves many in worse physical condition than when they arrived. And it is all done to earn the acceptance of total strangers. For Mick Foley, the desire to be authentic, the need to be loved, and the addiction to the roar of the crowd dictated his entire existence. Years later, while visiting a World Wrestling Entertainment warehouse with his daughter, Foley unexpectedly stumbled upon the original Hell in a cell structure. As he reached out and touched the cold, rusted steel, the legendary bruiser broke down in tears. It was a profound realization of his own mortality. He had survived the unsurvivable. According to medical experts and those close to him, Foley is incredibly lucky to still be with us. There is no monetary reward large enough to truly cover the horrific risks taken on that June night. Yet, when asked if he would change his path, Foley admits that while he lacked modern knowledge of head injuries, the canvas of professional wrestling offered him a magical way to create surreal, sublime performance art. Hell in a Cell remains an unmatched spectacle in sports entertainment. It is a monument to human endurance, a testament to the lengths a man will go for acceptance, and a stark reminder that in the pursuit of immortality, the physical and mental tolls are entirely real. The Descent into Madness, a dark side investigation. The stage is set. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a journey into the darkest, most unforgiving corners of professional wrestling history. We are looking back at a night that forever altered the landscape of sports entertainment. It was June 28th, 1998. The event was the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view. The battleground was the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, packed to the rafters with 16,000 screaming souls. But what those fans were about to witness was not just a match. It was a descent into pure, unadulterated madness. The Undertaker taking on mankind inside Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell. The very name hits you like a heavy mallet to the consciousness. Going into this night, the industry knew it was going to be chaotic. But nobody, not the fans, not the executives, and certainly not the medical personnel, knew it was going to be that crazy. We had two incredibly unique talents out there. Two men who liked to push the envelope until it teetered and fell right over the edge. As the old saying in the locker room goes, wrestling may be scripted, but you absolutely cannot fake gravity. I have sat at the commentary desk for decades. I have been frightened by a lot of things inside the squared circle. But nothing frightened me as much as what transpired that night. What left the fans absolutely stunned was the unrelenting, sheer punishment that Mick Foley endured until you saw it with your own two eyes. You simply did not believe that a human being could physically take that level of trauma and live to tell the tale. This match was real. The pain was real. The drama was profoundly real. Looking back, according to the account of those standing backstage, officials were cursing, screaming, and calling Foley an absolute idiot. Why are you doing this? That was the question echoing through the curtain. Today, this bout stands as one of wrestling's most infamous spectacles. Its legacy persists as both an epic, undeniable success and a terrifying cautionary tale. Many insiders believe the industry dodged several fatal bullets that day. When we analyze the events critically, it is truly crazy to think that officials would allow a performer to go completely unconscious and then simply continue the match. The collateral damage that ensued in the years to follow is a whole different story. It forces us to ask the hard questions. When does it stop? When is it enough? You pay all day long for the decisions you make in your 15 minutes in Spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But we all need to ask ourselves, was it truly worth it? The man behind the mask. To understand the madness of Hell in a Cell, we must first understand the psychology of the man known as Mankind, Mick Foley. Everyone who steps into the brutal world of professional wrestling is usually looking for something missing in their own lives. According to Foley's own reflections, he was teased a lot in his youth. He developed an overwhelming, deep-seated need to be liked, and an obsession with capturing the World Wrestling Federation Championship belt. Foley's desire to elicit a reaction started long before he ever laced up a pair of boots. During his sophomore year of college, he pulled a stunt that foreshadowed his entire career. He took a swig of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a stuffed animal resting on a cold concrete floor. Upon impact, he spat the fake blood concoction into the air. The entire dormitory was watching. When one girl yelled out that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley felt a surge of immense power. His philosophy was born in that moment. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could make them disgusted by him. He simply needed a reaction. That boy grew up to become a hardcore legend. For many modern viewers, Hell in a Cell is the perfect gateway into his career. It is often the first match shown to new fans. But as any wrestling historian will tell you, a normal Mick Foley match was already a spectacle of brutality, barbed wire, thumbtacks, fire. According to the documents, his time in Japan saw him subjected to composition for explosives. being speared through flaming tables and taking horrifying falls directly onto exposed concrete. He put his physical body through unimaginable torment. Why? Because realism was his greatest tool. Foley did not believe he was having a good match unless he had genuine physical trouble walking back to his hotel room. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain itself, but he relished the fact that he could endure it and sell in a way that entertained the masses. When you look into Foley's eyes outside the ring, as his wife Colette of over 35 years noted, you see a gentle, kind person with terrible humor and corny jokes. Their wedding song was even the theme from Beauty and the Beast. They were a solid team. She understood his relentless commitment to his craft. When that adrenaline was pumping, Foley's sole drive was to ensure the audience left talking about how great the show was, entirely at his own physical risk. This drive led to the creation of Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable character who possessed a bizarre, undeniable charisma. You simply could not take your eyes off him. Jim Cornette, who worked as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation during this era, noted that Foley was a master of in-ring psychology. He understood that the audience craved characters who appeared completely out of control, defying the script. By taking the fans on that chaotic ride, Foley commanded their attention, and his legendary reputation began to grow. The road to the Federation. Before the fame, Foley's life was humble. He and Colette shared a bedroom with a mattress on the floor and a broken video cassette recorder. On that machine, Foley would watch up to 12 hours of Japanese wrestling a day. He was captivated by the realism and the storytelling. In those death matches, it was not just man versus man. The competitor had to defeat the surrounding environment itself. At the time, Foley believed Japan would be his permanent home. Japanese promoters were looking for a foreigner to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Funk, widely regarded as one of the greatest of all time for his ability to make fans suspend their disbelief in an instant, became a mentor to Foley. Together, they engaged in explosive, fiery, and incredibly bloody death matches across the Pacific. Foley would literally crawl on his hands and knees during these bouts, viewing the agony as proof that he was doing something truly special. He never envisioned himself as a World Wrestling Federation superstar. The Federation was operating in a general audience-rated era, often viewed as very bland. Foley's violent, hardcore style did not mesh with what the corporate machine was selling. In fact, Vince McMahon explicitly did not want Mick Foley. McMahon did not think Foley was marketable and certainly did not think he was physically attractive enough to be a top star. It was Jim Ross, then the vice president of talent relations, who convinced McMahon to take a gamble. Ross needed a dancing partner for the company's biggest attraction, The Undertaker. McMahon had continually tried pairing The Undertaker with giant, lumbering opponents, resulting in matches that were dull and lifeless. Ross knew that what The Undertaker truly needed was a lunatic. According to backstage lore, McMahon slammed his hand on a table and reluctantly agreed, but with a massive caveat. He insisted they cover Foley's face with a mask. McMahon viewed Foley as a nobody. From this corporate mandate, the character of Mankind was born. Gerald Briscoe, a Hall of Fame producer, recalled the immense challenge of building a character out of essentially nothing. Yet this bizarre, deranged persona worked. And it worked solely because of Mick Foley's absolute commitment. Foley had an unmatched connection to the audience. He was willing to try absolutely anything. The Undertaker and Mankind proceeded to lay a massive foundation, wrestling in numerous pay-per-view and television matches around the globe. But by 1998, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He knew he had to do something drastic to cement their legacy. The cell is lowered. For the King of the Ring event, producers planned to reignite the Mankind and Undertaker feud using the recently developed Hell in a Cell concept. Traditional cage matches required a superstar to escape by climbing over the top or walking through a door. Hell in a Cell was different. It featured a roof. 2 men enter, only 1 leaves. The very first Hell in a Cell match featured The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. It was a technical masterpiece, setting an incredibly high bar. Foley openly admitted he could not replicate the supreme athleticism of Michaels and The Undertaker. He needed a different approach. According to the historical documents, Foley consulted with his mentor, Terry Funk. During their brainstorming session, Funk jokingly suggested that they start the match on the literal roof of the cage, and that Foley should be thrown off. It was a punchline, but Foley stopped laughing, looked at Funk, and stated that he thought he could actually survive it. The idea took root in his mind. He pitched the horrifying concept of being thrown off the top of the cell to Vince McMahon and The Undertaker. Initially, The Undertaker was completely against the idea of throwing his opponent from such a perilous height. But Foley was dead set on it. He sold him on the vision. Foley viewed this not as the dawn of a new chapter in his career, but as a desperate move to keep his head above water, believing his run at the top was nearing its end. The Undertaker trusted Foley. If Foley could see it in his head, The Undertaker believed he could execute it safely. As Foley walked the ring that night in Pittsburgh, the pressure was immense. He was not a nimble athlete. As a referee and ring crew member named Jimmy Corderas noted from the backstage monitor area, nobody truly knew what to anticipate. Jim Ross, calling the action alongside Jerry Lawler at the broadcast table, was as much in the dark as the fans watching at home. The fans expected the combatants to enter the door. Instead, Mankind began to scale the outside of the demonic structure. The crowd was in shock. Why was he going up? Foley had confidently assured McMahon and The Undertaker that he was comfortable on the roof. The truth? He was absolutely terrified of heights. As he waited for The Undertaker's iconic music to play, Foley secretly wondered how he could gracefully climb back down without ruining his career. But The Undertaker followed him up. The match was officially underway, 20 feet above the concrete. The fall that stopped time. The tension in the arena was suffocating. The top section of the cage was secured only by zip ties. With nearly 600 pounds of human weight shifting above, the metal mesh began to sag by a full foot with every step. Zip ties were audibly snapping and springing off the structure. Foley attempted to execute a suplex on top of the unstable roof, but The Undertaker wisely cut it off, realizing the severe danger of both men crashing through the unscripted, failing mesh. The two heavyweights traded heavy punches, moving dangerously close to the edge of the structure, directly above the Spanish and English broadcast tables. From the floor, those tables looked like tiny dollhouse furniture. Jim Ross watched in horror, convinced that a fall from that height was simply too iffy, with zero margin for error. Then, the unthinkable happened. A 300-pound human being was forcefully flung from the sky. Mankind plummeted almost 20 feet, hurtling toward the broadcast tables. Witnesses described the moment as happening in a blink of an eye, yet simultaneously unfolding in agonizing slow motion. The sound of the impact was sickening, a massive, horrific crash. Spanish commentator Hugo Savanovic had to throw himself out of his chair to avoid being crushed. Backstage, the locker room erupted in sheer panic. It was described as being akin to witnessing a fatal car accident. Many genuinely thought Mick Foley was dead. The arena fell into a stunned, breathless silence, followed by an audible gasp of pure terror. As Jim Ross famously noted on commentary, he thought the man had been broken in half. Even those who understood the mechanics of the industry were shaken. You cannot fake a fall of that magnitude. If The Undertaker had thrown him just an inch too far or too short, Foley would have hit the concrete floor or landed directly on the fans. Foley, running entirely on massive spikes of adrenaline, had actually managed to turn his body in midair, landing flat on the table to cushion the blow. Backstage, producers scrambled, transitioning into business mode to capture the historic footage while simultaneously calling for emergency medical personnel. Terry Funk was the first to reach the wreckage, desperately checking to see if Foley was still conscious. Dr. Francois Petit, a highly skilled medical professional for the company, rushed to the scene. Foley had landed terribly on his back and on a dislocated shoulder. The situation was chaotic. Emergency personnel could not even fit the gurney down the aisle properly, forcing operators to actually raise the massive steel cell, with The Undertaker still standing on top of it, just to extract the injured superstar. They strapped Foley to the stretcher. Everyone in the building and millions watching around the world believed the match was definitively over. The second act of madness. But Mick Foley is a different breed of human being. As they wheeled him up the ramp, Foley realized that the longer he stayed in the public eye, the more deeply the audience engaged with the drama. Despite the pleas of officials, referees, and medical staff screaming at him to stop and stay down, Foley rolled off the gurney. With a dislocated shoulder and a battered body, he began to march back toward the ring. The crowd erupted into absolute insanity. Backstage, colleagues questioned his sanity, labeling him the craziest, most foolish man in the business. Yet, they simultaneously recognized that this very moment was cementing his status as a legendary star. Foley scaled the cage a second time. According to the planned narrative, the next sequence was supposed to be relatively safe. They had agreed on a choke slam that would gradually cause the mesh to give way, allowing The Undertaker to visually stuff Mankind down through the roof. That is not what happened. When The Undertaker delivered the choke slam, the compromised mesh completely gave way instantly. Foley plummeted to the roof of the cage, free-falling directly down to the ring canvas. This was not a cushion landing. A wrestling ring is built over heavy steel and wood. Hitting that mat is akin to hitting solid cement. But the fall itself was only half the tragedy. As Foley dropped, a heavy, solid steel folding chair fell right behind him, striking him violently directly in the face upon impact. This was not scripted. This was a catastrophic accident. For the first time in his entire career, Mick Foley was legitimately knocked completely unconscious. He lay motionless in the center of the ring. Backstage, absolute terror took over. Colette Foley, watching at home with her children, was furious, feeling betrayed because she believed her husband had hidden the second, fatal-looking stunt from her. Dr. Francois Petit and Terry Funk flooded the cage once again. The Undertaker, looking down from the broken roof, later stated he thought Foley might be dead. He instructed Funk to check if Foley was still breathing. For 42 agonizing seconds, Foley had zero recollection of reality. He was out cold, realizing the gravity of the situation and needing to buy the medical team precious time. Terry Funk brilliantly improvised. He walked up to The Undertaker and initiated a physical altercation, drawing the audience's attention away from a motionless Foley. Looking back, many industry veterans agree that this match absolutely should have been stopped. But in that era of professional wrestling, matches were rarely halted. Officials simply bought time. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was Terry Funk's shoes. Disoriented and severely concussed, he demanded to continue. He miraculously stood up. His face was a horrific, bloody mess. A massive wound had been torn open underneath his lower lip. Ever the showman, even in a state of severe trauma, Foley purposely stuck his tongue to the open hole in his face, smiling a terrifying, blood-soaked smile for the television cameras. Then came the visual that haunts fans to this day. A tooth was visibly lodged inside Foley's nostril. According to medical staff, the steel chair had knocked the tooth out, sending it down his throat. Because he was breathing so heavily, he actually inhaled the tooth backward, forcing it up through his nasal passage. The match continued. The pain was excruciatingly real. Foley, operating on pure instinct, even requested the introduction of thumbtacks. He purposely threw his battered body into the thousands of steel tacks, rolling around to ensure they stuck to his flesh, solidifying the visual of an unstoppable monster. Finally, after 17 agonizing minutes, The Undertaker secured the victory. The aftermath and the toll. When the bell rang, 16,000 fans in Pittsburgh had witnessed something that would never be replicated. Foley waved off the stretcher a second time, limping to the back on his own 2 feet. The fans recognized the absolute reality of his sacrifice. By risking his very life, he had earned their undying belief and respect. Backstage, the reality of the situation crashed down. Colette Foley waited in agonizing silence for a phone call, her children terrified that their father had perished on live television. When Foley finally called hours later, he faced the righteous anger of a terrified wife. From that night on, her trust in his ability to protect himself in the ring was severely fractured. Behind the curtain, Vince McMahon pulled Foley aside. While thanking him for his incredible sacrifice, the chairman of the company issued a stern warning. He demanded that Foley promise never to do anything like that again. Meanwhile, Foley was so concussed he was asking The Undertaker if they had remembered to execute the thumbtack sequence. Completely unaware that a doctor was actively plucking steel tacks out his back at that very moment. The physical toll was devastating. Foley suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, missing teeth, 15 stitches below his lip, and a severe concussion. Yet, professionally, the match was a monumental triumph. It sparked a massive career renaissance. 6 months after Vince McMahon claimed he did not want him, Mick Foley became the World Wrestling Federation champion. But success breeds a dangerous addiction to the roar of the crowd. The bar had been raised to an impossible height. Foley felt a heavy obligation to live up to the moniker of a hardcore legend, constantly pushing the limits of physical human endurance. Management warned him that this reckless style would eventually catch up with him, but Foley pushed forward. Just 7 months later, he engaged in the infamous I Quit match against The Rock. It was about defined by sickening brutality. The script called for Foley to take a series of unprotected steel chair shots to the head while handcuffed. He had explicitly instructed The Rock to hit him as hard as possible. They planned for few strikes. Instead, Foley absorbed 11 massive, unprotected chair shots to the skull. According to his daughter Noelle, the footage is deeply traumatic. She harbors a profound hatred for that specific match. Taking 11 full-force headshots could easily kill a normal human being. Foley willingly accepted brain damage for the sake of a television storyline, desperately trying to over-deliver for the fans. The price of glory. Today, we look at the remnants of those decisions. Over his career, Foley suffered concussion after concussion. There were times when he drove his car and could not even remember where he lived. When he finally sought independent medical advice, a neurologist delivered a grim verdict. He advised Foley to never wrestle again. The long-term effects of such extreme physical trauma are terrifying. Every heavy impact in the ring is likened to a 25-mile-per-hour car accident. The looming shadow of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain, disease caused by repetitive trauma, hangs heavily over the Foley family. His children worry daily about what his cognitive health will look like in 10 or 20 years. Foley himself admits he is deeply worried, but he refuses to live in complete fear of the unknown. To combat the mental decline, he engages in spoken word tours, mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp and to continue feeling the warmth and stimulation of a live audience. He still craves that acceptance. When reflecting on his legacy, Foley is honest. For years, he harbored deep resentment toward hell in a cell, feeling it overshadowed everything else he had accomplished in his storied career. He fell into a dark, psychological place. But a conversation with The Undertaker changed his perspective. The dead man reminded him that what they created that night in Pittsburgh would outlive them both. Foley has made peace with his legacy. During a visit to the corporate warehouse with his daughter, he unexpectedly came face-to-face with the original cell structure. Touching the cold steel, the hardcore legend broke down and cried, a rare release of emotion, acknowledging the sheer terror of how close he came to losing his life, and the immense gravity of that night. According to his own words, there is no financial or professional reward big enough to truly justify the risk he took. With modern medical knowledge regarding head injuries, it is hard to fathom anyone ever being allowed to take such punishment again, but Foley views his career as a form of surreal, sublime performance art. He suffered for his craft to earn the love of total strangers. Was it worth it? That is a question only Mick Foley can answer. But one thing is absolutely certain. Professional wrestling will never, ever forget the night mankind went through hell. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view event, a single match would permanently carve its place into the bedrock of sports entertainment as one of the most shocking spectacles in history. The Undertaker versus Mankind in Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell. The very name hits you like a wooden mallet to the consciousness. As an observer of this industry for decades, I knew the concept was designed to be chaotic. But I, along with the rest of the world, did not know it was going to be that chaotic. That night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we had two talents out there who liked to push the absolute envelope until it practically fell over the edge of sanity. People often say professional wrestling is a performance, but as the old adage goes, you cannot fake gravity. I have been frightened by a multitude of things in the world of professional wrestling, but nothing frightened me quite as much as the events of that evening, at least until later on in the very same match. What left fans fundamentally stunned was the unrelenting, sheer punishment that Mick Foley endured until you saw it with your own two eyes. You simply did not believe that a human being could physically take that level of trauma and live to tell the tale. This match was real. The pain was real. The drama was real. Sitting at the commentary desk, voices were screaming, cursing, calling him an absolute idiot. Why are you doing this? It is one of wrestling's most infamous bouts. Hell in a Cell's legacy persists to this day as both an epic storytelling success and a grim cautionary tale. According to the accounts of those present, the industry dodged bullets that day. Not just one, but several. It is genuinely baffling to look back and realize that officials would allow a performer to go unconscious and then simply continue the match. But the collateral damage that ensued is another story entirely. When does it stop? When is it enough? The harsh reality of this business is that you pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. Yet, all of us need to look in the mirror and ask the ultimate question. Was it worth it? The psychology of sacrifice. To understand the match, you must first understand the man. Everyone who steps into the squared circle is looking for something they find missing in their own personal lives. For Mick Foley, the driving force was a profound, overwhelming need to be liked. He had been teased heavily in his youth, and that desire for acceptance morphed into a relentless drive to capture the World Wrestling Federation Championship. As recounted by Foley himself, the seeds of his hardcore persona were planted during his sophomore year in college. He took a swig of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a stuffed animal resting on a solid concrete floor. Upon impact, he spat the blood-like concoction into the air. The entire dormitory was watching. When one of the female students yelled out that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley felt a sudden surge of power. A philosophy was born in that dorm room. If I cannot make people love me, perhaps I can disgust them. He simply needed to get reactions. This was the birth of the hardcore legend. However, Hell in a Cell is a terrifying gateway for new fans. When newcomers are shown this match as their introduction to the sport, their immediate follow-up question is often whether all matches are this violent. The simple answer is no. But for Mick Foley, extreme brutality was his baseline. Whether it was blood, thumbtacks, fire, barbed wire, or being exploded by composition for explosives in Japanese deathmatch, Foley subjected his physique to unimaginable extremes. According to his daughter, Noelle Foley, he thrived on eliciting shock from the audience. He sought the visceral gasps of disgust and awe. Realism was his primary tool. Foley truly believed he was not having a quality performance unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room later that night. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain itself, but rather the fact that he could absorb it and sell it to the audience in a highly entertaining fashion. Behind the scars, however, was a gentle man, his wife, Colette Foley, who has known him for over 35 years. Saw a kind soul with terrible humor and corny jokes. Their wedding song was Beauty and the Beast, a fitting metaphor for a man who compartmentalized A. Sweet family life from a monstrous professional alter ego. But when the adrenaline pumped, his singular drive was to ensure the fans left the arena talking about his performance, even at his own profound physical risk. The birth of Mankind. Before he was Mankind, he was Cactus Jack, a wild, charismatic brawler who commanded attention through sheer unpredictability. Jim Cornette, who worked as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, noted Foley's masterful grasp of in-ring psychology. Foley knew the fans gravitated toward performers who appeared entirely out of control, individuals who seemingly went against the script. By taking the audience on a chaotic emotional ride, Foley ensured the spotlight remained firmly on him. His dedication was unmatched. Foley and his wife once lived with minimal furniture, just a mattress on the floor and a videocassette recorder that barely worked. On that machine, Foley would study Japanese wrestling tapes for up to 12 hours a day. He was captivated by the realism and the environmental storytelling of those matches. He initially believed Japan would be his permanent career home. In Japan, they were searching for a foreign talent to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Funk, renowned for his unparalleled ability to make an audience suspend their disbelief, became a mentor to Foley. Together, they engaged in explosive, fiery death match that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. Foley felt that subjecting himself to these gruesome extremes was absolute proof that he was achieving something special. Because of his brutal style, Foley never envisioned himself in the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the company was heavily focused on a general audience, family-friendly product. It was a very bland era, and Foley's gritty style did not seem to mesh with the corporate vision. According to former superstar Al Snow, who traveled the roads with Foley, Chairman Vince McMahon flatly did not want to hire him. McMahon did not find Foley marketable or physically attractive for television. It took the persistence of Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations, to convince McMahon to take a chance. Ross needed a fresh dancing partner for The Undertaker, one of the biggest box office draws in wrestling history. McMahon kept booking massive, lumbering giants to face The Undertaker, which resulted in dull, plodding matches. Ross knew what was truly needed, a lunatic. McMahon finally capitulated, allegedly slamming his hand on a table and agreeing to bring Foley in, under the strict condition that his face be completely covered with a leather mask. McMahon's perception was that Foley was a nobody. The creative team was tasked with building a character out of thin air. Thus, Mankind was born. As Hall of Famer Gerald Briscoe pointed out, this bizarre, deranged character would have failed miserably with any other performer, but Foley committed completely, literally pulling his own hair out during interviews to sell the madness. Without that profound connection to the audience, the costume would have been meaningless. The fans sensed his utter commitment.